Liebe Freunde des Karlspreises.
Dear friends of the Charlemagne Prize, I extend a warm welcome to you to the second Charlemagne European Summit. The European Summit, the aim is to be a platform and to talk about the themes that concern and move Europe. The International Charlemagne Prize stands for the unity of Europe. So if you break this down, at the end, these are subjects where people decide to work together to their mutual benefit, or perhaps because they're not of mutual benefit. The subjects of migration, which is a very prominent subject, the subject of security, or perhaps pandemic management, where people may think that it would be better to work together closely. We've established this format to extend the format of the Charlemagne Prize, but also to encourage young people to work on these themes. So one of the aims of the European Summit is to take the results of our research year and to present the 4 fellows that have been selected, and at the same time to open the new research year with 5 fellows. We support these fellows, and that was certainly only possible thanks to generous sponsoring, for example, by the Robert Bosch Foundation and by the King Baudouin Foundation, and also by the Foreign Office. Generally speaking, the Charlemagne Prize wishes to thank its sponsor, the National Association of Cooperative Banks, and of course, to thank the state government of North Rhine-Westphalia, who has also supported this event very generously. That's the core of the issue, what moves Europe. So what is important to Europe? Ladies and gentlemen, this question is a question that the International Charlemagne Prize has been asking for 70 years. It asks this question and faces up to the challenges to encourage the European integration process and, of course, to strengthen the common functions of the European member states and of the European Union. In this post-war era today, we can by all means say that many things have moved Europe, and Europe has achieved a lot in these years. Not only democracy, peace and freedom, but also social prosperity that has been established in many years, discrepancies that have been removed. And if we look at the recent history, the cooperation perhaps amongst health systems to combat the pandemic, for example, research, vaccines, combating terrorism, these are all positive elements that have brought Europe together, and where people can say it's good that these things are being done. But at the same time, in recent years, we have an increasing number of people who are skeptical towards the European Union, people who think that this association is not fit for the future and will not last. And indeed, we have crises such as the euro crisis, the migration crisis, Brexit, the rupture with America, and also the tension with Russia, with Turkey. Many other things show that there are many spanners in the works. At present, many people are saying that the election result in the United States will bring Europe back onto the world political stage. I don't think this will happen automatically. I think Europe has to reform itself, develop its own strengths, and initiate reform procedures. We, the International Charlemagne Prize, 2 years ago, we set up the European Charlemagne Prize Academy because, above all, we wanted to face up to the challenges of the future of Europe. And we initially took young people from the academic field and asked them to identify these issues together with us and to work on solutions. And as the Charlemagne Prize, we want to use this summit and today's event to approach young people, citizens, and also decision makers in Europe, politicians business representatives, media representatives, scientists. We want to bring these people together to discuss these solution approaches and perhaps in this way to influence the process of European integration. I can only ask that you show courage today. Everything that's important to you, formulate perhaps what you've developed on an individual basis, and to engage in a discussion with the political decision makers. We ask you to demonstrate this courage because we are of the opinion that if we don't address these questions, then they will just go under and encourage those people who are skeptical as regards Europe. So on this note, once again, a warm welcome to you all, and thank you very much for participating. And if you now look at your screen, we have the first keywords for the issues, and this will be the main center of today's discussion. Now, I will hand over to today's moderator for the first panel, Hans-Jürgen Moritz and Maria Kunak, who will also include the Greek finance minister in this panel. So I wish you all a successful day.
Minister Staikouras, you're online. You can start now.
Thank you.
Waiting for your words. Thank you for joining us. And
hello, good morning. First of all, I would like to thank the Charlemagne Prize Academy and the Rhine-Westphalia state government for their invitation to today's online conference. It's a great honor for me to share the digital floor with so many distinguished speakers. Europe is faced an unprecedented multidimensional crisis due to the COVID-19 pandemic, a crisis which is continuously rekindled. It is characterized by a great deal of uncertainty, and it has led the European economy and the national economies to very deep recession, the deepest since the World War II, and to a rise in unemployment. Europe has to tackle this severe crisis and its social and economic consequences rapidly, methodically, and in a spirit of solidarity. Was the need for solidarity fulfilled? Thankfully, as far as the creation of new instruments and the activation and enhancement of pre-existing ones to respond to the circumstances concerned, the answer is positive. Europe has taken important decisions, activating both fiscal and liquidity boosting measures. Just to pick up some of them, fiscal rules, targets, and requirements were lifted. The framework for state aid and public procurement became more flexible. The ECB has introduced the PEPP and has adopted a package of temporary collateral easing measures. Europe activated a safety net for states, employees, and businesses through the ESM pandemic crisis support, the SURE program to subsidize employment, and the Pan-European EIB Guarantee Fund to strengthen business liquidity. And of course, Next Generation EU with its major pillars, such as the Recovery and Resilience Facility, the REACT-EU, and the Just Transition Fund was added to our armory. If we add the total amount available through the above-mentioned safety net and Next Generation EU, a huge total firearm of 1.3 trillion euros, more than the multi-annual financial framework for the period 2021-2027, is available to support our economies and to lead to a strong and resilient recovery. While the MFF itself also offers us a vast amount of funds to kickstart our national economies and to implement policies and structural reforms that will form the basis for strong, sustainable, clever, and inclusive growth. What is now important is to proceed from design to execution, to demonstrate solidarity in action. Going forward, it is crucial that Europe's next steps include, first of all, the fastest possible disbursement of funds from the Next Generation EU initiative, and mainly the proper and efficient use of grants from the Recovery and Resilience Facility in a swift, growth-friendly, and socially cohesive way. Secondly, the continuation of fiscal relaxation in 2021, at least for 2021, and the necessary preparation for a soft landing from fiscal relaxation to the gradual and careful return to rules, targets, and requirements that will serve fiscal prudence while sustaining economic activity and protecting employment. This return has to take place in due time because, according to the European Commission and the ECB, it will take at least 2 years until the European economy comes close to regaining its pre-pandemic level. And finally, successfully tackling poverty and inequality in order to prevent further strain on social cohesion. I will elaborate more on the best and fastest possible use of Next Generation EU, which is cornerstone for the recovery of our economies and their sustainable and inclusive growth. The political agreement reached between the German presidency of the Council and the European Parliament's negotiators last Tuesday on the next multi-annual financial framework was the extremely important step towards facing the challenge ahead. We all now have to cooperate on the proper and efficient use of these instruments and funds, both in the European and in the national level. In the case of Greece, our government has completed its national recovery and resilience plan and will submit it to the European Commission in the coming days. A high-level task force has been formed in the Secretary of the Government to coordinate the proposals submitted by every ministry, to align the proposals of the Strategic Growth Plan to the policy priorities of the government, and to monitor the implementation of this plan and the utilization of these funds. Furthermore, a special unit for the Recovery Fund has been created in the Ministry of Finance. The big challenge ahead is to achieve high and sustainable growth and to improve its composition. To this purpose, we are laying the groundwork for making the best use of the available funds in order to implement policies based on the objectives set by our National Recovery and Resilience Plan. This plan is based upon 4 pillars: green, digital, private investment and economic transformation, and employment, skills, and social cohesion. These pillars reflect horizontal European priorities, as well as Greek-specific economic priorities, consistent with the country-specific recommendations provided to Greece in the context of the European semester in 2019 and 2020. Each pillar includes components consisting of relevant reforms and investments as follows, just to pick up some of them. On the green pillar, power up, reforms and investments to promote the further take-up of renewables and efficient electricity and gas network infrastructures, also in light of the phase-out of lignite and take into account the Just Transition Plan. Renovate, reforms and investments to promote improvement of energy efficiency in private and public buildings. Recharge and refuel, reforms and investments to promote safe and sustainable transport and logistics, and in particular, the development of electromobility and the implementation of strategic low-carbon public transport projects. Sustainable use of resources, climate resilience, and environmental protection. Reforms and investments to improve water management, solid waste, and wastewater treatment. It should also improve climate resilience through climate proofing of infrastructure and environmental protection. On the second pillar, digital, connect. The component could include investments in fixed, very high capacity networks, 5Gs, and international connectivity. Modernize, investments to expand digital public administration and public services, including the provision of a European digital identity, as well as a comprehensive land reform. Digitalization of businesses, reforms and investments to promote the take-up of digital technologies by businesses. Third pillar, employment, skills, and social cohesion. Promote job creation in the labor market. Reforms and investments to strengthen the capacity of the public employment service. Education, vocational education, and training, as well as skills. Reforms and investments to improve the labor market relevance of the educational system and reinforce vocational education, training, and lifelong learning. Improve resilience, accessibility, and sustainability of healthcare. Reforms and investments to strengthen primary health care and long-term care, modernize hospital management and infrastructure, and promote prevention and e-health services and long-term care. Increase access to effective and inclusive social policies, reforms and investments to broaden access to high-quality social services for disadvantaged groups. And finally, fourth pillar, private investment and economic transformation, making taxes more growth-friendly and improving tax administration and tax collection. Reforms and investments to simplify the tax code, combat shadow economy, and strengthen the tax administration. Modernize public administration, including through speeding up the implementation of public investments, improving the public procurement framework, capacity building measures, and fighting corruption. Improve the efficiency of the justice system, reforms and investments to improve the efficiency of the judiciary system, including through enhancements to the court structure and digitalization. Strengthen the financial system and capital markets, reforms and investments in the financial sector and the pension system to increase savings, further develop financial instruments, and strengthen capital markets. Promote research and innovation, reforms and investments to support knowledge and technology transfer and to exploit and diffuse innovation. Modernize and improve resilience on key economic sectors. Reforms and investments to improve productivity and resilience of key economic sectors such as agriculture, tourism, and culture. And finally, promote private investments and exports and improve the business environment. Take advantage of all the above. We will have the opportunity not only to recover, but to enter a strong and sustainable upward trajectory, which will lead to attracting important investments and create new, high-quality jobs. An opportunity that we decided to seize in order to restructure the economy, to enhance its productivity and to improve its competitiveness. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm convinced that all my European colleagues and all the European governments stand ready to cooperate, having an absolute sense of urgency in order to achieve fast recovery and to bring out Europe as a power of peace, democracy, growth, and social cohesion. A power which was created step by step on the basis of solidarity. As Robert Schuman, the architect of European integration, has stated 70 years ago in his declaration, which gave birth to the European coal and steel community, on quotes, Europe will not be able all at once or according to a single plan. It will be built through concrete achievements which first create a de facto solidarity. In these turbulent times, it is our duty to remain united vis-à-vis the invisible enemy of the coronavirus and to tackle its social and economic consequences by demonstrating solidarity in action. It is up to us to overcome the current crisis and its consequences and to ensure a bright and promising future for our children. It is our duty and we can make it. Thank you very much.
The minister will now leave us, but we have enough expertise available and strong opinions in our four-man panel. So first of all, I would like to speak to Mrs. Kolak. Mrs. Kolak, we are again faced by a crisis. We are familiar with crises in the EU, but the last crisis in which we invested a lot of money.
Dear Mr. Morris, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for inviting me to represent the Association of German Cooperative Banks. Unfortunately, I heard an echo in your question. I do hope that I understood your question nevertheless. The German Association of Cooperative Banks love to support the Charlemagne Prize. So what can we say in view of the crisis and in view of the second lockdown light? Well, first of all, we should compare with the financial market crisis insofar as the conditions are different today. The German banks and the European banks are part of the solution to overcome the crisis. They support particularly and massively also thanks to the numerous activities initiated by the federal government and also the Recovery and Resilience Fund. These are supporting SMEs and helping the SME to actually go through the crisis. And the banks have actually been well set to do so. The fear of a credit crunch has not actually materialized. So as of today, we can not expect a credit crunch to occur. We will be able to provide our corporate customers with money. There are many, many support schemes. And in contrast to the financial crisis, the group of cooperative banks have equity funds and doubled this amount, 16 billion euro. And the capital of European banks compared to the financial crisis have improved very clearly. So we are intensively working in a very focused manner and investing all our energy to support companies to master the crisis.
Mr. Mrs. Kolak has said that the problem will not be the banks this time. On the contrary, they will play a positive role. Why? So why do we have to pump so much money into this corona crisis, as has been done with the 750 billion euros of credit of support?
Well, the banks are just a reflex and a reflection of the economic difficulties caused by corona and also due to structural problems. Banks have made enough mistakes, especially before 2008, when they still played risky games and actually lent their money, creating bubbles, and finally ended up in trouble themselves so that they had to be bailed out. We Germans have also spent a lot of money. 8% of the GNP was the German debt ratio caused by the bailout measures undertaken in the initial phase of the euro crisis. It's different this time, but the banks are, of course, not well positioned because banks hardly ever work with a lot of equity. They always have only a very small amount of equity and can therefore end up in trouble easily. We should not overlook that the rating increases for long-term securities in bank balances have been caused by this fact. And this is, again, a bubble that will burst if we had regular interests again. It is all due to the zero interest policy. And everybody is afraid of this for that very reason. Well, the amounts of money, well, they have been agreed upon, but the money has not been disbursed yet because not all of the conditions have not been accepted yet. Hungary is still blocking that, but 750 billion euros is quite a sizable amount. And a counter budget was also adopted. I would feel better if this money was actually collected on the capital markets with savers who don't know where to put their money. They don't even know where to invest, and they wouldn't buy the bonds, our national bonds, simply because the bonds of this European fund that was created will actually be sold or are going to be sold to the ECB. So at the end of the day, Europe is doing what systems have done time and again in the past. When you actually have a printing press in reach, then you simply print the money to cover the spendings. And this has been the case to a giant amount during the euro crisis, and it's happening again during the corona crisis. With the programs already adopted so far until summer next year, we will actually multiply the amount of ECB funds by a factor of 6 compared to 2008. And the economy is not that much bigger. This is quite a sizable amount. And I do not know how we shall get out of this, because reversing this policy is hardly imaginable. The state bonds bought by the ECB cannot be sold again on the market. Then the share prices will drop, and this is why this will not be done. So the amount of money will stay in the system, and if the economy is revved up again, then there's simply too much money around. You would have to take out the money, but you can't for these economic reasons. And then there's a risk of inflation. Europe is not on a very solid course, considering the monetarization of national debt. And this is also the reason for the many pending causes at the German Constitutional Court.
Private people think they can never have too much money, but economists say, well, no, you could have too much money and create inflation. So following the financial crisis, this didn't happen. Perhaps we can go into more steps. Perhaps could I ask the business representative to say something? Because you are intended to receive financing support and to receive European help at the corona level as agreed. So, Mr. Noel is a member of an international company. His company produces foam for industry and also for private households. And you work at various locations, and obviously you have been able to gain a good view of the economic situation in Europe. Who needs state support? And perhaps who doesn't need this support?
Yeah, Guten Tag
Well,
zusammen.
good
Ich
morning,
kann Frau
all.
Bullock beipflichten,
I can only
wenn sie von der
endorse
Unterstützung
what
der
Mrs.
Banken für mittelständische
Bullock
Unternehmen
said when she speaks about
redet.
the
Wir haben
support
das
provided
erfahren,
for
recht
SMEs.
problemlos.
We've
Und
experienced
das
this
hilft
without
natürlich
major
und
problems.
war
It does, of
zeitweise
course,
auch
help, and
notwendig.
it was necessary for a certain
Am
amount of
allerwichtigsten war
time.
allerdings
But what was
während der
most
harten Zeit der Krise,
important
die
during
bisher bei
the
uns
tough
im
times of the
März, April
crisis,
und Mai erlebt
this
wurde,
was in March,
waren die
April, and
staatlichen
May.
Maßnahmen wie Kurzarbeit
We had state
und
measures such as
andere
short-time
Hilfen für
working and other
Haushalte, für
assistance for
die besonders
households
betroffenen Sektoren,
and the sectors that were
sie
particularly affected
zeitweise dann zu
in
unterstützen.
order to
Aber wir haben es
support
mit einer
them.
Krise zu tun,
But
wie wir
we're
sie
faced
in
with a
Friedenszeiten
crisis
bisher noch
in
nie
peace
erlebt haben.
times that
Und ich
we
in meinem
have
Leben auf
never
keinen Fall.
experienced before. At
Und
least I haven't in my
man ist
lifetime.
sehr, sehr unterschiedlich betroffen.
And you're
Wir
affected to
sehen,
varying
dass zum Beispiel
degrees.
unser
We can
polnisches
see
Werk
that
praktisch die
our
ganze Zeit
Polish
durchgelaufen ist.
plant
Frankreich
has been
stand
operating
2
non-stop,
Monate lang
while
still.
France came to
Die
a standstill for
Automobilindustrie,
2
die bei uns
months.
etwa
The
20% des
automotive
Umsatzes
industry
darstellt,
that
ist
accounts for
zusammengebrochen.
20% of the turnover
Und
collapsed.
andere Industriesektoren
And
auch.
other sectors of industry
Andererseits
also
beliefern
collapsed.
wir
On the other
Baumärkte, also den
hand, we're
Do-it-yourself-Sektor.
supplying DIY
Und da kann ich frei auch
markets.
sagen,
And I
da
can
boomt
tell
es
you,
richtig.
this
Da
business
sind
has
wir
been
nicht nur über
booming.
Vorjahr, wir
We're
sind über
not
Budget.
above
Und
last year's
auch
previous
wieder
year sales, we're
sehr
even above
unterschiedlich je nach
budget.
Ländern.
And again, varying
Frankreich hatte
by
während 2
country.
Monaten seine Baumärkte
France
geschlossen, Deutschland hat
had
sie offen
closed
gelassen.
its DIY markets for
Und
2 months. Germany left the
die
DIY markets
Resultate zeigen
open.
sich
And the
augenblicklich
results
in den
are
unterschiedlichen
currently also
Rückgängen
reflected
der BIPs
by the various
verschiedener Länder in
declines
Europa.
of the gross
Aber
national product in
ich
various
habe auch
European
viele
countries.
kleine Unternehmen erlebt,
But I've also
bei denen die
seen
Mittel
many
zu
small
spät gekommen sind,
companies
bei
where
manchen
the money
bis
arrived
heute
too
noch
late.
nicht. Das hat auch
Some
seine
have not
Gründe.
received anything until
Aber
today for
da
reasons.
hat es wirklich gehakt,
But
denke ich.
this was really a
Und
hiccup.
ich hoffe, dass jetzt bei der
And I do
zweiten,
hope that now in
beim
the
zweiten Ausbruch der
second
Pandemie
outbreak of the
wir dafür
pandemic,
etwas gelernt haben,
we
nämlich
have learned our
Notsituationen,
lesson.
Arbeitslosigkeit. In
Unemployment.
Belgien sehen wir das ja ganz
In Belgium,
ausdrücklich
we
in
can
Städten wie
see
Lüttich, wie
this
Brüssel, mit
clearly in
Arbeitslosenraten von 30 bis zu
in cities like
30%,
Brussels or
Jugendarbeitslosigkeit
Liège
von
with
50%.
unemployment
Das darf
rates,
nicht
youth
sein.
unemployment rate of 50%,
Und das wird
unemployment
gesellschaftliche
rates of
Folgen haben.
36%.
Also wir sind
This will
im
have
Unternehmen
impacts on society.
de facto
In
sehr solidarisch
our
gewesen, denn
company,
die eine
we
Branche
have
hat der anderen
shown a
geholfen.
lot of
Das eine Land
solidarity. One
hat das
sector
andere
propped
kompensiert.
up the other
Und ich
sector.
denke, in
Countries
der
helped out and
Volkswirtschaft,
compensated for others.
da ist Herr Sinn
But in
natürlich
economy at
enorm viel
large,
kompetenter als ich, nämlich mein
and Mr.
Volkswirtschaftsstudium
Zinn
geht
is
schon
of
auf
course
Jahrzehnte zurück.
far more competent than I am, because I studied economics
Ist
such a long time
eben
ago.
auch Solidarität und Solidität, möchte ich dazu sagen,
Solidarity
gefordert.
and a
Wir haben
solid
null
governance
Probleme
are
mit den
called
Banken
for.
gehabt.
We had no problems
Wir haben
whatsoever
sogar
with the
unsere Liquidität
banks.
stark
We
aufstocken
even
können, aber weil wir eine
succeeded in
solide Bilanz haben.
increasing our
Und
liquidity because
andere
we have a
Unternehmen,
solid
die aber
balance sheet.
trotzdem
Other
systemnotwendig
companies
sein werden,
who will be
nachdem die
relevant to
Krise
the system
hoffentlich
after
in
the
etwa einem Jahr
crisis will
vorüber ist,
hopefully be over in a
dann
year's time,
brauchen wir die auch noch.
will
Und
also be needed
da
at
denke
that
ich,
time.
fehlt noch ein Mechanismus,
And there is a mechanism,
dem
to
man-
my
an dem
mind,
man
still
arbeiten,
missing
sollte.
that we should work on.
Also
Well,
kurz, Verlierer und Gewinner
briefly, there
gibt es
are
auf jeden
losers
Fall.
and winners,
Und
no doubt about it.
rein gesellschaftlich gesehen, aber auch aus
And
wirtschaftlichem Interesse
speaking in societal
müssen
terms,
wir uns
but
solidarisch
also
verhalten zwischen
from
Ländern,
the
zwischen
economic
Regionen,
point of
zwischen
interest, we
Unternehmern.
have to show
Wir helfen
solidarity
auch
between
unseren Kunden,
companies,
die
between
augenblicklich
countries. We also
Liquiditätsprobleme
help
haben.
out
Und wir helfen ihnen zu
customers
überleben,
that
damit
have
sie auch
liquidity
in
problems.
einem
We
Jahr
help
noch
them to
unsere Kunden sein
survive
können.
so that they can still be our customers
Das
in a year from
sollte
now.
auf allen Niveaus der
And
Fall
this
sein.
should
Und
be the case on all
man hört auch,
levels.
dass die
What we also
europäische
hear
Politik,
is
die
that the
deutsche Politik,
European
auch die
policy
vieler
and
anderer
German policy
Mitgliedstaaten
and the full
in diese
other
Richtung
member
geht. Aber
states
es muss, wie auch
policies
der
are going in
Minister
that
es eben sagte,
direction. But as the minister
schneller
rightly
gehen.
said,
Es muss
we have to
unbürokratischer
speed
gehen.
up. There has to be
Damit haben wir
less
als
red
Unternehmer
tape. This
unsere Sorgen.
is
Und wir fragen
what
uns,
really concerns
warum?
us as entrepreneurs, and we wonder why.
Wir hören Sie nicht.
We can't hear
Herr
you.
Moritz?
Mr. Moritz, yes, hello. I would now like to move on to the fourth participant, Rolf-Dieter Krause. I would like to ask him to provide his contribution. We've heard a lot about solidarity. The minister was also talking about not only about investments, but reforms, because we've known the EU for some years. We would like to know, to what extent can we expect solidarity? Because there is one mechanism that has been unknown so far in this context, and on the other hand, should these investments be aimed at the future? But the Economic Stability Pact has been put on ice. We are also talking about the side effects of Corona. How do you see the situation? Good morning from Berlin. First of all, I would like to say I don't like the term solidarity in terms of reflecting what's going on now. Solidarity is only solidarity if it's not forced on people. Here, it's being forced on people. The second thing is that, at least as I understand things, solidarity is also only the extension of efforts, but not the substitute for efforts. But in Europe, we are talking about an understanding of solidarity, which means we put the burden onto others. As Mr. Sin said, he talked about the problems of the central bank actions, and he's explained this on the budget side. I would like to add one point. It's increasingly apparent that money is the only kit that keeps today's EU together. It's the only putty that keeps the EU together, and this is the only putty. Then if we talk about the rule of law, one of the basic prerequisites for standing together, if we have to assert this, and if we're looking at the budget compromise, which is apparently being blocked, if we look at the rule of law mechanism, which is very weak anyway, if we look at the values that have been sworn in speeches, if we throw these into the trash can because they're not shared on a comprehensive basis, if money is the only putty, then I have to ask the question, is Europe worth all this money? Because one thing is clear. Each new question that arises will be a matter of providing more money, even more money. And if we don't remind ourselves of what we want, if we don't make ourselves fit to act in trade policy and foreign policy, where Europe is perhaps a blocker rather than an enhancer of our opportunities, the opposite of what we intended, then I'm pessimistic about Europeans' future. And all this money that's being introduced into the markets, and this money would have been a waste of time. That's my big fear. Those are reserved comments that come from somebody who knows Brussels, who's known Brussels for many years. Perhaps a question to Mr. Sin. Mr. Krause has spoken about the fact that we are using an awful lot of money. I think after 2019, where we had a low debt level in the Eurozone, we are now 9% or more. Could you perhaps outline the consequences that you feel this will inevitably have, or perhaps what we need to do now to ensure greater stability?
Ja, Herr Krause,
Well, Mr. Krause
Ja, das zu Recht hier kritisch dargestellt.
spoke
Diese
critically
Solidaritätsmaßnahmen
about
mit dem
the
Wiederaufbaufonds von
solidarity
750
measures with
Milliarden
this
Euro.
recovery fund of
Das
750
schon
billion
eigenartiges
euros,
Verständnis
and
von
rightly
Solidarität,
so.
weil,
This is a very strange understanding of the term of
die Kosten
solidarity,
dieser
because the
Maßnahmen
costs
werden
of
ja nur treffen,
these
die da
measures
jetzt gar
will
nicht so
hit
direkt betroffen
people
waren,
who
gefragt
were
wurden. Es
not
gibt zwei
directly
Möglichkeiten.
affected
Entweder
and
sind
were
es
never
zukünftige
asked.
Steuerzahler,
This is
das
either
sind unsere
future
Kinder, die
taxpayers, this is our
noch gar nicht haben
children,
mitstimmen dürfen, zum Teil
who could
noch gar nicht
not
geboren sind,
cast a vote, and some
zu
of them
deren
are even
Lasten man jetzt
born.
diese Mittel hier
And at
ausschüttet.
their
Oder es
expense,
sind
we're dispersing these funds now, or
Geldvermögensbesitzer,
it is
also die kleinen Leute, die ein bisschen was
fund
gespart
owners,
haben, zu wenig,
the little
daraus
people who've
Realvermögen zu bilden,
saved
die keine
too
Aktien haben oder
little,
Häuser,
who don't have
aber
any
die
homes, houses,
Lebensversicherungsverträge
or
haben, die
shares,
Sparverträge
but
haben,
actually
die
put
ein
their
bisschen
money
Geld auf die
in
hohe Kante gelegt
insurance
haben. Das sind
contracts
alles
and have saved some money.
nominalwertgesicherte
This is
Anspruchstitel.
all
Und
nominal
die können
values,
eben durch eine
and
Inflation zu den Verlierern
these
gehören.
can actually be among the
Herr Moritz, Sie haben
losers
vorhin
through
gefragt, ja,
inflation.
wie kommt das
Mr.
denn, dass wir
Moritz, a
bislang noch
while
keine
ago,
Inflation
you
hatten,
asked why
obwohl schon so
didn't
viel
we
Geld
have an
in Umlauf
inflation
gebracht
so
wurde.
far, because
Das ist
so much money has
leicht
been
erklärbar
printed. Well,
durch
that's easy to
das
explain
Phänomen der Horte oder der
through the
Liquiditätsfalle. Das ist ein Begriff, den John Maynard Keynes
phenomenon of
eingeführt hat.
John Maynard Keynes' trap or liquidity
Vor
trap.
Keynes dachte man ja,
Before
also doppelt so
Keynes,
viel Geld,
people
doppelt so
thought
hohe
if you
Preise, ja,
have
da würde
double the
Proportionalität
amount of
entstehen.
money,
Und das
the
ist ja
prices will be
offenbar
twice as
nicht der Fall.
high. This is
Warum?
obviously not the case.
Weil
Why?
dieses Geld aus der
Because
Druckerpresse,
the
was
money
über
from the printing
die
press,
Kredite an die
which
Unternehmen
is
letztlich
actually
zu
handed
Lohnzahlungen
down
führt,
to the
über
companies
die
through loans
Auszahlungen
and
an
then
die Staaten,
dispersed as
das ganze
salaries,
Sozialbudget,
the
die
social
Renten
budgets,
und
the
diese Dinge
pension schemes, all of these
mitfinanziert.
things
Dieses Geld,
are
was bei den
co-financed.
Leuten
This
dann ankommt,
money that actually ends up in the hands
wird
of the
zum Teil in
people
Horte gesteckt,
is
statt
actually
im
tucked
Konsum zu gehen
away
oder
instead
über
of
das
being
Bankensystem
invested in
verwendet zu
consumption,
werden,
or
neue
instead of being
Kredite für
used
Käufe
through
von
the
Maschinen und
banking
anderen
system
Anlageobjekten zu
to be handed
finanzieren,
out
die
as
auch gesamtwirtschaftliche
additional loans
Nachfrage
for
sind.
buying
Das ist der
machinery,
Grund
for
dafür,
instance. And this
warum
is
es da diesen
also
Inflationsschub gibt.
why we have this
Geld landet in
inflation
Horte in
trap.
Form des Geldes
The
unter der
end
Matratze, des
ends
physischen
up in
Geldes im
shelters,
Tresor, aber
the
vor allem
physical
in
money
Form
ends
von
up in safe,
Depositen,
and
die
money ends up in
Geschäftsbanken bei ihren
deposits
jeweiligen
held
Notenbanken
by
einfach liegen
commercial
lassen,
banks
statt
at their
sie in den Kreislauf zu bringen.
loan
Und
banks instead of actually
deswegen ist das nicht
recirculating these
inflationär.
funds.
Deswegen ist
And
aber
this
auch
is
diese
why
ganze
we don't see an
Geldpolitik
inflation.
unwirksam. Die
But this is
EZB
also
sagt ja,
why
sie
all
will
of this monetary
Inflation schaffen, sie
policy
schafft es
does not
nicht.
create an
Und dann gibt
effect.
sie noch mehr
There
Geld
is no
aus. Sie schafft es
inflation,
trotzdem
so
nicht, weil
they're
das
spending
Geld
even more money
halt
and there's
in
no
die
inflation,
Horte geht.
simply
Aber eines
because
Tages kann das
this money
anders
ends
sein.
up in shelters. But
Die
one day
Klassiker,
this will
Keynesianer
probably
und andere
change.
haben das Bild
Keynesians
der müden
have
Pferde
drawn the
benutzt.
picture
Das ist
of
ein
the
Kurzschatz, der
tired
da auf dem Kurzrock
horses.
sitzt und
And
der
you've
lässt die
got
Zügel locker
the
und hofft, dass
guy
die Pferde
sitting up
laufen.
there
Die
hoping that
laufen aber
the
nicht, weil sie müde
horses
sind.
will
Der lässt sie
run,
noch
but they're
lockerer. Die
tired.
laufen immer
And
noch
he
nicht. Er
actually
verlängert die Zügel
loses
immer
the
weiter, in der
reins
Hoffnung,
even
dass die Pferde
further,
laufen.
even
Sie
further,
laufen nicht. Man
hoping
kann
that
nicht mit
the
einem Strick
horses will
etwas
run.
anschieben.
You
Aber irgendwann
cannot
sind die
actually
Pferde wieder
push
munter,
these
haben sich
horses. But
erholt.
then,
Corona ist
after a
vorbei.
while, the
Der
coachman
Optimismus
understands the
verbreitet sich.
corona is
Die Ölpreise
over,
steigen, die
optimism
Importpreise
spreads,
steigen,
oil
die Löhne
prices
steigen
go up,
daraufhin. Es gibt
salaries
einen
go
Kostendruck
up.
bei den
There is a
Unternehmen,
cost
der sie zu
pressure at
Preiserhöhungen zwingt.
companies that
Dann wäre
actually
die Zeit gekommen, die
induces
Zügel
price
anzuziehen.
increases.
Nur
This
die
would be
sind
the time to
unendlich lang.
pull the reins, but the
Die
reins
kriegt man
are
gar nicht wieder
incredibly long. The coachman
Man kriegt sie
can't
aus
pull them.
politisch-ökonomischen Gründen nicht
And for
angezogen, weil es
political
ja
reason, you
bedeutet, dass man
can't
über
actually
3
pull the
Billionen
reins,
Euro
because this would
Staatspapiere wieder
mean
zurückwerfen
that
müsste
you
in die
would
Märkte. Wenn
have
man
to
das
actually
tut,
throw back
dann gehen die
300
Zinsen in den
billion
Himmel,
worth
die
of
Staaten kommen in Schwierigkeiten
securities
und
onto the
die
market. And this
Kurse
will
der
bring states into
Staatspapiere gehen
trouble.
in den Keller.
And
Banken,
the
die ähnliche
share
Papiere hinter ihren
prices will
Büchern haben,
actually go
kämen
down
in
the
Schwierigkeiten,
drain.
weil
And
sie
banks would be in trouble if they
Bewertungsverluste
have
haben. All die
these
Luftnummern,
on
die
their
da verbucht
portfolio.
worden sind
So
durch
all of
die
the
gewaltige
bubbles
Aufblähung der
booked
Assetpreise,
through the
die
asset
würden eben
prices that
verschwinden und
have
wir hätten eine Bankenkrise.
created
Deswegen wird
such
das nicht passieren. Die
a
EZB
bubble.
wird stattdessen,
The
wenn eine solche
ECB
Inflation dann mal kommt,
instead,
ihre
when the
Semantik
inflation finally
ändern und sagen,
arrives, will
naja, so
change
schlimm
its
ist das ja
semantics
nicht.
and
Jetzt
say,
hatten wir
well, it's
20
not
Jahre
that bad. Well, for
weniger als
20
2%
years we had
Inflation, da können wir
below
uns jetzt auch mal
2% of
20
inflation. Now we can afford more than 2% inflation for the next 20 years. And then you're in a new regime. And when people then expect that the value of money is eroded, then they actually dissolve their shelters, and this increases inflation, which makes people actually create a galloping inflation. And this is the risk we are running. You cannot live and thrive on a printing press. Impossible. You have to spend funds that are actually taken from other sources. The belief that the Lord will allow this and simply provide these resources that we actually print rights for in the form of paper, this will not happen.
That's a lot of horses involved through Lord God. Okay, the idea is clear. We have horse experts and other bank experts, someone who is familiar with bank customers. I would like to ask Mrs. Kolak, can you confirm Mr. Sin's comments? Perhaps say that people are hiding money under the mattress?
Yes, in fact, well, I'm a practitioner, and we have observed a large increase in the savings ratio. People do not know where to spend and invest in future. This is, in effect, a dimension that we will have to face up to in future, but there are various aspects to it. What was mentioned here, do we really need a perspective for how the ECB will actually get the investments out of the books and to end the minus interest, zero interest phase? We need this perspective. On the other hand, to actually touch upon what Mr. Krause said, money cannot be the only putty that keeps things together. In the cooperative banks, for instance, we have values. We feed on these values. And this means responsibility. This is a wake-up call, Corona, for all of the member states and all of the individual institutes and each individual company, but also each individual citizen to show responsibility. And this also means solid state finance. I think we have to tackle the problem from various sides for the next decade, and this means making Europe sustainable, future-proof. And I share Mr. Krause's view of solidity, and Mr. Noel mentioned this as well. And I would like to highlight the person's own responsibility. As an entrepreneur, I have to act with responsibility and cannot rely on state aid or assistance. And this would mean that we can also hand on to Europe, to our kids, to our next generation that is worth living in. And I dream of this, yes.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Kolak. Both Mr. Noel and Mr. Krause have commented. I would like to come back to Mr. Krause, who you spoke to directly. I would like to hand over to Rolf-Dieter Krause. What I would like to extend what Mr. Sin said in one sentence on one point, and perhaps add to what he said or contradict him. We don't see price increases on the basis of the ECB policy. We have enormous price increases, which is so high that, for example, a city such as Berlin, in Berlin, a young family, even with a good income, is no longer in a position to buy property. If I want to help my grandmother or my aunt, or if they don't help, within 10 years, prices have almost doubled. And this is not included in the ECB inflation calculations, but the consequences are dramatic. What I find more important, and if I answer Mrs. Kolak and come back to the question of the putty at the present, there is no other putty available in Europe. The rules that we set up and the agreements that we made Some governments are just adhering to these when it suits them. But the European contracts, with everything that was envisaged in spirit and in wording, they should be the principles of our common actions, but that's no longer the case. What the ECB is doing, based on theoretical teaching of many legal experts, may be correct, but actually, de facto, it's state financing, and we've never wanted this when ever since we've set up the ECB. Another thing, we are not even carrying out a clear analysis of Europe's situation. At the moment, Germany is the president within Europe. We know what Mr. Orban in Hungary, what France wants in terms of Europe, but do we know ourselves in Germany what our government wants in terms of Europe? I find this a catastrophic German failure, what's going on at the moment. There is no European policy. The German EU representatives are forcing the EU Parliament not to insist on over-strict rules, so as not to endanger the budget. What's the point of that? Is that the German European policy? But that's going to send us down the drain. We're spending an awful lot of money on maintaining ourselves and not even asking ourselves the question as to whether, as Europe is at the moment, is it worth keeping, or is this in line with the principles defined for Europe? Europe should have three functions: economic prosperity, freedom around us, and to give us a voice in the world. And two of these three are hardly available at present. Mr. Krause, I would like to hear what Mr. Noel has to say. Thank you very much. Mr. Noel, if I can say, the running down of everyday life, this should only flow into the second quarter of next year. This is related to the EU procedures. Will there be sufficient companies left over next year to receive these funds?
Hoffentlich ja. Und zwar über den Weg der Geschäftsbanken und der direkten Staatshilfen, die ja stattfinden. Und gesunde Unternehmen, überlebensfähige Unternehmen finden heute die Wege. Manchmal muss eine Governanzänderung her. Manchmal muss ein neuer Aktionär kommen, der diesen Wechsel auch verursachen kann. Aber da bin ich nicht pessimistisch. Ich finde auch, dass Herr Krause gerade ein sehr schwarzes Bild gemalt hat von Europa. Ein sehr politisches Bild. Die EZB ist ein ganz, ganz wichtiges Instrument heute, eben auch, weil das Geld der wichtigste Kit ist, über diese Kette läuft es leider. Aber ich erlebe das ganz anders. Ich lebe in der Euregio, in unserem Werk in Einarten. Arbeiten Holländer, arbeiten Deutsche, arbeiten Luxemburger. In meiner Gruppe mit 1600 Mitarbeitern haben wir 24 europäische Nationalitäten auf unserer Payroll. Das ist Europa. Wenn wir, Herr Professor Sinn, augenblicklich nicht investieren, also horten, wie so viele andere Unternehmen auch, liegt das nicht daran, dass wir auf dem Geld sitzen bleiben wollen. Das liegt daran, dass wir keine klare Perspektive haben. Wir haben zu viel Uncertainty, Unsicherheit. Und das liegt daran, dass wir kein Leadership sehen. Und daher, Krause, sehe ich das größte Problem in Europa.
I share your view. This is the biggest problem in Europe.
Und eine
Vision, leadership and a vision where we want to go. And as an entrepreneur say, we need a fiscal Europe, we need a social Europe.
Bei den Universitäten funktioniert es hervorragend.
It works so fine at universities. universities across state borders.
Die Sozialsysteme, wir wissen, dass das Besitzstandsorganisationen sind. Da muss jemand den Mut haben, das zu ändern. Und wie immer bei Veränderungen, bei Krisen sind ja gerade Veränderungszeiten, wird es Verlierer und Gewinner geben. Und unter anderem jetzt wende ich mich an deutsche Vertreter hier. Deutschland kann auch nicht auf der ganzen Reihe gewinnen. Solidarität heißt auch abgeben. Ich als Belgier in einem sehr komplexen Umfeld erlebe das ja dauernd. Wir haben eine Region, der es nicht gut geht, die auch nicht gut gemanagt ist. Das ist die Wallonie. Kriegen die augenblicklich noch am Überleben wegen der Ausgleiche, die von den anderen Regionen herkommen. Das ist gelebte Solidarität. Und so sehe ich das auch in Europa.
And this is what I see Europe like.
I have to ask you to hand over because we have some questions from the public. Could I perhaps ask you to raise your hands if you wish to answer a question? One person is asking, to what extent is Brexit influencing the corona support that has been decided? And of course, the question that we are all asking ourselves, have we got...
Wir haben jetzt eine gemeinschaftliche Verschuldung der EU beschlossen. Und dann noch ein dritter Aspekt, das Corona-Paket besteht ja aus Zuwendungen und aus Krediten. Man muss durchaus auch was zurückzahlen. Es besteht die Befürchtung, dass gerade dieser letzte Teil nicht in Anspruch genommen wird, sondern lieber alle das Easy Money haben wollen. Vielleicht so viel zu diesen drei Komplexen. Wer fühlt sich aufgerufen, dort jetzt etwas Licht ins Dunkel zu bringen?
Also wenn Sie mögen, kann ich zumindest vielleicht noch mal eine Sicht teilen. Vielleicht hat sich das so ein bisschen auch aus unserer Diskussion herauskristallisiert und die Kollegen im Zweifel korrigieren Sie auch noch mal um Ihre Einschätzung. Nach meinem Dafürhalten sollte dieses EU-Hilfspaket wirklich eine einmalige Aktion sein. Diese Hilfsgelder sollten zukunftsgerichtet investiert werden. Und wir hatten das ja auch im Eingangsstatement des griechischen Finanzministers gehört. Innovation, Forschung, Digitalisierung, Umwelt. Der weitere Aspekt, dass es wirklich dauerhaft keine Schuldenunion auf dieser Ebene in der EU geben sollte und insofern auch keine Eurobonds. Also das wäre, diese Perspektive könnte ich hier noch einbringen.
Frau Dieter, du hast dich da gleich zu Wort gemeldet. Herr Sinn natürlich auch. Machen wir es in der Reihenfolge. Krause, Sinn, bitte.
Ja, man muss dann kurz wenigstens darauf hinweisen, dass ausgerechnet der deutsche Finanzminister davon spricht, dass diese Möglichkeit der EU Schulden zu machen eine dauerhafte Sache sein soll. Erster Punkt. Zweiter Punkt, es sind keine Eurobonds durch die Hintertür. Es ist eine gemeinsame Verschuldung. Aber im Unterschied zu Eurobonds haften bei den Schulden, die die EU jetzt macht, die Mitgliedstaaten alle mit ihrem Anteil. Bei Eurobonds wäre die Möglichkeit gewesen, sich aus der Haftung für diese Schulden zurückzuziehen. Es gibt da die sogenannte gesamtschuldnerische Haftung. Und dann hätte es am Ende sein können, dass die gesamten Schulden theoretisch bei einem gelandet wären. Es sind also keine Eurobonds durch die Hintertür, um die Zuschauerfrage zu beantworten, sondern es ist etwas anderes, aber es sind gemeinsame Schulden.
Herr Sinn, bitte.
Also Eurobonds sind ja nicht genau definiert. Ursprünglich, als das aufkam, dachte man schon an eine proportionale Haftung und nicht an eine gesamtschuldnerische Haftung. In der strengen Form ist es eine gesamtschuldnerische Haftung. Aber ich glaube, wir haben tatsächlich auch eine gesamtschuldnerische Haftung. Denn die Vorstellung, dass man, wenn, sagen wir mal, ein Land, Griechenland, in Konkurs geht und sich nicht an der Rückzahlung dieser europäischen Schulden beteiligen kann, dass denn die anderen nicht dafür aufkommen, ist ja abwegig, Herr Krause, das würden Sie auch sagen. Faktisch ist der Druck dann bei den anderen, die Lasten des ausfallenden Landes mit zu übernehmen. Also das läuft schon auch auf eine gesamtschuldnerische Haftung hinaus und das sind definitiv Eurobonds, von denen Frau Merkel gesagt hat, zu ihren Lebzeiten würde es die nicht geben. Und was das Einmalige betrifft, naja, das kennen wir ja nun. Es ist ja immer nur einmalig, was alles gemacht wird. Denken Sie mal an die Diskussion damals um den Rettungsschirm EFSF. Es ist einmalig. Das wird auch zeitlich begrenzt und dann wird es wieder abgeschafft. Das war also dann im Mai 2010 die deutsche Bedingung geradezu, die de Maizière ausgehandelt hatte, ja, war so stolz drauf, einmalig, Pustekuchen. Kurz danach kam der ESM und dann hieß es, naja, der ESM ersetzt den dauerhafte Rettungsschirm, ersetzt jetzt den EFSF, aber nein, dann hat man den EFSF auch noch weiterlaufen lassen und es ist eine Dauereinrichtung daraus geworden. Und Herr Krause hat zu Recht gesagt, Herr Scholz hat ja selbst betont, dass dies ein Hamilton-Moment sei und dass man jetzt in ein neues Regime komme, wo dauerhaft eine neue Finanzierungsquelle für Europa zur Verfügung steht. Und diese Gemeinschaftsschulden sind nicht gut. Ich meine, solidarisches Europa ist prima, hört sich gut an, aber es wird nicht funktionieren. Es führt zu übermäßiger Verschuldung, die dann nicht mehr verbucht ist in den nationalen Haushalten. Es führt zu einem riesigen Kladderadatsch, wie damals übrigens nach Hamilton, der die Schulden der Einzelstaaten vergemeinschaftet hatte, eine Blase erzeugt hatte, eine Wirtschaftsblase. Und zum Schluss, ein paar Jahrzehnte später, hatten wir 9 von 29 Staaten und Territorien formal im Konkurs. Nichts als Streit und Hass war durch diese Hamiltonsche Vergemeinschaftungsaktion entstanden. Also ich bin, wie wir alle, überzeugter Europäer. Wir müssen die europäische Integration vorantreiben, die Werte, wir müssen Außenpolitik machen, wir müssen gemeinsame Infrastrukturprojekte entwickeln, grenzüberschreitende Verkehrswege entwickeln. Da gibt es so viel zu tun. Die Verteidigung muss auf gemeinsame Beine gestellt werden. Aber das soziale Europa, wo es Transfers gibt und dann auch noch zu Lasten zukünftiger Generationen, das ist der Keim für ganz gravierende Probleme, an denen die EU eines Tages nach Jahrzehnten, ähnlich wie nach Hamilton, auch zerbrechen kann. Die Amerikaner haben ihren Sezessionskrieg gekriegt, der nach Meinung von führenden Historikern tatsächlich damit zu tun hatte, dass auch dieses Schuldenproblem, was durch die Sozialisierung der Schulden entstanden war, niemals gelöst wurde. Wir müssen aus den historischen Erfahrungen lernen und die Amerikaner dürfen wir in dem Punkt nicht wiederholen, sondern wir müssen ein wettbewerbliches Europa erzeugen, wo wo sich Lohnstrukturen entwickeln, nicht Strukturen, die von Sozialstaaten künstlich hochgehalten werden, sondern wettbewerbliche Lohnstrukturen, sodass alle Länder, ob reich oder arm, ins Geschäft kommen. In dem Maße, wie ich jetzt die soziale Schiene hier entwickle, mache ich die natürlichen Lohnstrukturen kaputt und treibe große Teile Europas in die Dauerarbeitslosigkeit. Wir erzeugen dann ein Mezzogiorno, wie es im Süden Italiens schon 50 Jahre existiert, im ganzen Mittelmeerraum, wenn wir so weitermachen.
Okay,
also das halte ich für vollkommen falsch.
Hass und Streit in den USA, ja, das kommt uns bekannt vor und hat offensichtlich Gründe, die sehr, sehr weit zurückreichen. Herr Noel, da ich Sie vorhin so rüde unterbrochen habe, möchte ich Ihnen das Schlusswort geben. Vielleicht können Sie uns aus der Sicht der Wirtschaft dieses Wort Brexit, das immer vorkommen muss, in jeder Diskussion über die EU, auch noch in irgendeiner Weise näher bringen. Wirkt sich das bei Ihnen bereits aus mit dem Brexit und wird der Brexit vielleicht die Corona-Hilfen auch erschweren? Bitte um eine kurze Antwort.
Der Brexit war für uns eine Sorge und auch ein Thema, um das wir uns gekümmert haben vor 2 Jahren. Inzwischen ist das neben den viel problematischeren Umfeldsituationen Nebensache geworden. Mit dem Brexit werden wir fertig werden. Aber das ist wieder mal ein klares Beispiel für abwesenden Leadership. Da ist keine Vision und da ist ein Land wie Großbritannien einfach dem Volksmund nachgegangen und wir werden sehen, was das in 5 oder 10 Jahren an Ergebnissen bringt. Unser englisches Werk, das kann ich Ihnen sagen, verliert über 20 Arbeitsplätze durch den Brexit.
Okay, we were just talking about Brexit. Excuse me for interrupting and excuse me for switching to English. I was just informed that the interpreting is not quite working right now, and most of our public is of the English tongue. So thank you all so much.
Ja, hallo zusammen. Da sind wir aus der Kaffeepause zurück.
Hello everyone, we're back from the coffee break. And the English interpretation is back again as well. Well, we will now come
dieser Veranstaltung, nämlich der Präsentation der Forschungsergebnisse aus unserem Fellowship-Programm.
It's about European topics. It is about topics that answer the question, how do we want to live together? What do we want to live on? How can we actually shape the European future? The topics that we want to work on together, and who is better positioned to do so than young people? And this is exactly why we opted for these young fellows. The question is, what is young? We have postgraduates that we selected, so people who have already undergone the first university training. They're ex-graduates, so they're no longer just learning, but they're also representing something. And we're very excited to hear about the results. And I would like to announce as the first fellow who will actually speak for 6 minutes and can provide an overview of what he has achieved in the past year. The first fellow is Professor Dr. Federico Fabbrini. He is the head of the Brexit Institute of the Dublin City University, and he dealt with the establishment of a conference on the future of Europe. So it's a great topic. It's convinced us back then, and we're really excited to hear about the research results. Now, dear fellow Federico, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, dear Thomas, for your kind introduction and for giving me the floor. Let me start off by warmly thanking you, Jürgen Linden, Christine Klemm, and the whole board of directors of the Charlemagne Prize Academy. It was humbling and honoring to be the first Charlemagne Prize Fellow, and I am grateful to the Foundation and the Academy for the opportunity to work closely with them and with their support during the past 12 months. Now, my project, and I will start sharing the screen, my project was entitled The Conference on the Future of Europe, a New Model to Reform the European Union, and it focused on a proposal originally put forward by French President Emmanuel Macron to establish a conference in early 2020 after Brexit to relaunch our project of European integration. Now, as you know, due to COVID-19, the beginning of this process was delayed, and so the conference hasn't kick-started yet. Nevertheless, on a more positive note, the pandemic actually gave me a bit more time to work on this project than what I had expected. So within the framework of the fellowship, I actually managed to write a book that I am able to present to you today. The book is entitled Brexit and the Future of the European Union, The Case for Constitutional Reforms. It is published by Oxford University Press, and it will be out in a couple of weeks from today. It will be in stock at the end of November, and then easily available on all the online tools from the beginning of December. So what I would like to do with you today is to give a quick snapshot of what the book is about. And as such, le plan de l'exposé of my quick remarks this morning will follow exactly the book structure. So what I'm doing in the volume, I'm taking Brexit as a prism to analyze the future of the European Union. So first, I consider the state of the EU during Brexit. Secondly, I analyze the EU besides Brexit, focusing on other crises that the EU has faced. Thirdly, I look at the European Union beyond Brexit, and that's where the Conference on the Future of Europe becomes timely. And finally, I reflect on the long-term prospects of the EU after Brexit with perspective for the future of integration. I will go very quickly through this point just to give you a sense of my reflections on the topic. So Brexit was a milestone event. It was the first case of disintegration in the European Union, and yet the EU reacted in a very united way to the decision of the United Kingdom to withdraw. Of course, Brexit posed significant transitional institutional issues for the European Union, but it also led to the emergence of the EU 27, the grouping of the other member states during the 4 years of negotiation. And it is within this context that actually the institutions and the member state have also started a debate on the future of Europe. And that is what I've been interested about. Now, this debate is relevant because in addition to Brexit, or besides Brexit, in the last decade, the European Union has faced a plurality of crises. Old crises, such as the euro crisis, the migration crisis, the rule of law crisis, but then again, new crises. And I'm thinking here, of course, of the pandemic, COVID-19, but you could think of other issues, such as the challenges of climate change or issues connected to the enlargement, for example. And in all these crises, what we have seen is the emergence of competing visions on the process of European integration. And member states of the European Union are still very divided on what type of Europe they want and what they think Europe should be. Some of the member states see Europe as a polity, as a community of shared destiny, if you will, but others see Europe mostly as a market project designed to enhance the welfare, the economic welfare of countries. And some other states, unfortunately, also see the EU mostly as an instrument to entrench autocracy through funding that support illiberal drift at the national level. Now, this scenario, in my view, calls for reforming the European Union. And as I posited in my work in this book and elsewhere, the recovery plan that has been put forward in response to COVID-19 actually further enhances the need for reforming Europe. And yet, when we think about the EU beyond Brexit and the need for reforms, we have to be mindful about the obstacles on the way. And the key challenge moving forward is, of course, treaty change, which under Article 48 of the treaty requires unanimity. And getting unanimous agreement by state is a major hurdle towards success. Nevertheless, what I think it's important to be mindful about is that in recent years, alternative opportunities for reform have emerged in the context of the European Union. And particularly during the euro crisis, we have seen treaties adopted to strengthen economic and monetary union, which were drafted outside the EU. And these treaties overcome unanimity rules by super qualified majority requirements for their entry into force. And as such, I think this serves as potential precedents or templates for the Conference on the Future of Europe, which, as I said at the start, is a plan that is designed to relaunch integration after Brexit. Where do we stand at the moment? As of now, we are awaiting a joint declaration that should kickstart the process of the conference. The idea has now been endorsed by all EU institutions, and in a sense, this initiative is really an out-of-the-box plan, which echoes precedents such as the Convention on the Future of Europe 20 years ago. Now, if we want this project to succeed, I believe we have to think of prospects for it. And in my work and in my fellowship, I've made the case that the Conference on the Future of Europe should resolve to draft a political compact, a new treaty that relaunches integration. I think, in fact, reforming the EU and relaunching integration should be at our heart, and we can expect the conference to play a role. And I hope my book and the work I've done in the fellowship will contribute to make the case in favor of reforming the European Union, but there is no doubt more work remains to be done, and I will be carrying it forward myself at the Brexit Institute that I lead, as well as in the Jean Monnet Bridge project I direct in Dublin, and I hope we can continue cooperation with the Charlemagne Prize Fellowship as well. Thank you very much.
Lieber Federico, das war auf den Punkt.
Dear Frederick, thank you very much. That was very concise. Thank you very much for your presentation. This was a great honor for us, and we hope that once the program has been completed, we will remain in contact. And let's come to number 2. This is Marie Walter Franke, who is a doctoral student at an Institute for Politics at the University of Berlin and a research fellow at the Jacques Delors Center in the Hertie School in Berlin. So another very European CV, and with a great topic, a very important topic. It's about a restart in the asylum policy, a factor that has dominated the European history like no other. Thank you very much. First of all, let me put my presentation on the screen.
I would like to thank
Ich möchte die Stiftung danken für diese Gelegenheit.
It's exciting to be able to share the results of 1 year of research. This project started a year ago after President-elect of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, promised that she would deliver a fresh start for the asylum and migration policy of the European Union. And so my project was looking into how we can overcome polarization and politicization in this field to frame a European asylum system that will be fair to refugees and to member states. So in my papers, I identified 2 main structural challenges that need to be addressed. One is the anchorage of asylum and migration policies in a home bias, a security framing that stems from the early days of integration, where migration and asylum integration was all about addressing security concerns linked to the disappearance of internal borders. The second structural issue that needs to be tackled are collective action problems. Here, we are mainly concerned with difficulties of member states to work together under the coordination of the EU. For instance, when we have to disembark a search and rescue vessel for relocating people and to address humanitarian crisis that we see, for instance, on Lesbos right now. So I developed a redeployment model. Just a few words about this. You can read more in my papers. The main goals of the model was to find ways that we can actually achieve a reform, even though member states have different goals and views and interests. A way that we can use EU resources to their full potential in that field, and of course, developing abilities to address urgent challenges in a timely manner. The model has 2 main dimensions. One is horizontal. Here, the idea is basically to see where it's important to tackle refugee-related issues in a cross-cutting manner across the competencies and resources of EU institutions, rather than only anchoring them in the home affairs field. And this includes redistributing competencies. On the vertical axis, the idea here is to redistribute resources if necessary, and competencies across levels of EU governance and national governance. And here, strengthening EU agencies and subnational actors is quite important. So we're now in a new political moment. In September 2020, the Commission published the new Pact on Migration and Asylum, a big legislative package, here I wanted to address quickly how my work can also flow into this process. The good news on the one hand is that a number of proposals that I put forward throughout the year are actually in the pact. A couple of examples: we have crisis management tools that include a reformed temporary protection system, that's not the immediate protection. We have a tool of responsibility sharing that is supposed to be automatically triggered in crisis situations. We also have in some ways, horizontal redeployment with a separate political space for everything related to legal migration and long-term residency. And we have a stronger human rights monitoring project within asylum policy. There are still challenges related to the structural issues identified. If we look at the home bias, for instance, there is a very strong focus on addressing asylum challenges at the border with border processing centers, for instance, and putting return as a key role within the whole new system. This comes with a number of old problems relating to human rights protection, for instance, and also practical aspects, especially in implementing return. Looking at collective action problems, we still have question marks on how the responsibility sharing mechanism will indeed operate, since it's quite flexible, and we haven't got a solution for disembarkation of research and rescue vessels. So a couple of recommendations for this reform cycle from my research. For the proposals that have been already tabled, I would urge the policymakers to focus on feasibility and maximizing the European Union's added value. This means especially when we look at border processing centers, to include local actors and civil society to create sustainable and fair systems on the borders, if this is going to happen. And in the work of EU and institutions and agencies, we have to put a strong focus on transparency and accountability, as well as coordination with non-governmental actors. For those proposals that are still upcoming, we could really think in terms of redeployment. And for instance, there is the Action Plan for Integration and Inclusion upcoming. This would be an opportunity to include the aspect of reception of asylum seekers, for instance, within this much more suitable policy area. We also need to strengthen agencies that have not had already their resources further developed. This concerns EASO, the European Asylum Support Office, that is supposed to become an agency for asylum, but also the Fundamental Rights Agency to be able to fulfill its role. And of course, we should look beyond the pact. So to make the asylum system work, we need complementary initiatives that are going to address side problems. And here, for instance, my proposal of developing European civil protection could play a role. And of course, there's also the active operationalization of the capacities at local or regional level that is going to play a bigger role in the financial framework. So thank you very much to the Charlemagne Prize Academy and all the partners for making this possible, and thank you all for your attention.
Ja, liebe Marie.
Okay, dear Marie, thank you very much for your superb contribution on an important topic for Europe. Now let's come to Dr. Maria Victoria Mas, an assistant professor for journalism at the University of Catalonia in Barcelona. The subject is very interesting. It's about fake news and the influence of this on democracy. The subject has become more important in recent years, so that makes us all the more interested in hearing your contribution. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for your introduction. I'll be sharing my screen first. Well, before starting my presentation, I would like to thank the Academy, of course, for supporting this amazing research year. And also, I would like to name my mentors, Dr. Silvia Mayo and Dr. Ana Cardenal, who I think that are joining us today. Working with them was one of the best things of this program, so I should thank you them. Then I will start my presentation about my research. But before starting, I would like to introduce the context of the research. When I applied to this fellowship, Catalonia in Spain, the place where I belong, was going through a crisis, one of the most violent episodes of its recent history. And the UK also was struggling to find a withdrawal agreement to leave the EU. Both political crises were polarizing political opinion, and also fostered populisms, nationalisms, extremisms, and both political crises were interfered by misinformation. And then the COVID-19 crisis changed the global agenda. So we thought that this was like an unprecedented opportunity to analyze how misinformation was working and how can we tackle this threat through global democracies. Since 2015, the European Commission is promoting an action plan, so several actions against disinformation. But however, well, the debate about regulation of social platforms and political advertising is still ongoing. There's a broad agreement about the need of promoting media literacy and civic education programs. So we empower citizens and make them less vulnerable to misinformation. In this context, the question that I proposed was what can be done to strengthen resilience to misinformation in the European Union. And I studied how people inform themselves about the COVID-19 in Spain and the UK, and which were the most common misperceptions. Also, I will try to analyze which were the main drivers of this misinformation. So being able to propose a way of designing these media literacy and civic education programs. Then some of the methods I used is the analysis of a novel dataset containing web tracking data and a two-way survey. So I was able to observe patterns of news consumption on mobile and desktop devices and self-reported data of the same individuals. I did my analysis during the period of the lockdown in each country, in Spain and the UK, from mid-March to mid-May 2020. And I recruited a sample of 700 users in Spain and 600 users in the UK with the help of two market research companies. What we saw about the news consumption patterns is that obviously news consumption increased in Spain and the UK during the two first months of the crisis, but users accessed online news mainly through mobile devices. And the main way to access online news was going directly to a news site or app, and users mainly relied on established news media outlets, which is good news. We can see in these graphs that the most visited online brands were traditional or well-established news media outlets from newspapers in Spain and some television channels. And also that we can see that in the UK, the public service broadcaster, the BBC, has had the greatest leadership with a great contrast from Spain, who has her PSB like a very low rates. Also, here we can see that the news media market in both countries is perceived by our users as pretty much skewed to the left or to the right. So we can see that there's perceived like a very a low independence, political independence from news media outlets that leads to these low levels of trust in news media sites and also in political sources. In both countries, we can see that political sources and also news media sources are the less trusted. And we can see that there's an exception, because in the UK, the BBC is trusted for more than half of the sample. But we also can see that there's like a great decrease of the trust in the BBC and also in the British government. This distrust is really concerning when it leads to users to use alternative ways of accessing information. we can see that social platforms are the second main access source to news in Spain, and very, very closely to the news media sites. And as in the UK, social media is the second main accessor, but there's a great difference between the first one. If we see the side doors to online news outlets that we analyze through the tracking data, we see that in Spain, overall, WhatsApp and Facebook has a great relevance as side doors to online news outlets. And this is really, really concerning because, as we know, false informations are usually spreading through these kind of platforms. So if we move on to the most common misperceptions about the new coronavirus in both countries, what we see here are the main claims which gather relevant percentages of credibility. Let me highlight that we asked about a lot of false claims that were spread during the 2 first months of the pandemic, and that they were debunked by several fact checkers in each country, and the most of them didn't gather relevant percentages of credibility. So what we see here are the most credible. Okay, so if we analyze the differences between countries, we can see that propaganda was like the main kind of misinformation that gathered more credibility in both countries. And we talk about propaganda when we are talking about claims spread by political sources with a political intention, or maybe also about misleading claims or claims spread by sources sometimes unknown, but with an apparent political intention as well. Okay, if we move forward to the conclusions, we can see that misinformation did not have an overall penetration in the audience who relied on well-established news outlets. I think that's a good news because most part of the people were relying on the most important news media outlets in this country. So, but we need to highlight that some misleading claims from national politicians and malicious hoaxes with partisan intention caused the most credible misperceptions, and these ones were sometimes spread by news media outlets or by social media platforms. And last, we need to highlight as well that once conspiracy theory gathered some credibility in Spain, which was the one talking about the coronavirus being a bioweapon constructed to provoke harm. So yeah, and in this country, we know that social platforms and messaging apps such as WhatsApp were really important during this period of the pandemic. So these conclusions, or these results, lead us to propose that or support that the strategy of the European Commission of supporting media literacy and civic education needs to focus on this kind of programs that are promoting critical thinking rather than only instrumental digital competence, and awareness on political ideologies, persuasion strategies, and cognitive biases, and also the balance in news media diets to build well-informed opinions far from the most polarized extremes. Well, thank you so much for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer any question that you may have.
Ja, liebe Marie.
Dear Marie, thank you very much for this great presentation. I think things will be difficult for democracy if people go into bubbles and communicate via parallel realities. That must be one of the biggest threats that we're observing at present. So thank you very much for this superb presentation. And I would like once again to draw your attention to the fact that the Q&A session is going on in the background. It's very busy. Look at the user surface to be able to participate. Now let's come to fellow number 4. Fellow number 4 is Georgia Petropoulou from Greece. And hello. And she is a master graduate in international security, and she will take us through a journey to the Western Balkans, and will look at the connectivity strategy that can be used by the countries of the West Balkan as a foreign policy tool for the future expansion policy. So over to you.
And very good morning to everyone from sunny Netherlands. And here we are a year later attending this virtual summit. And while the only constant thing in this life is change, the EU enlargement will continue to be a topic of discussion despite the current global circumstances. Probably you already know that my project focuses on the EU enlargement in the framework of connectivity. And today I aim to share with you my observations and suggestions for having a more concrete EU connectivity approach. Before that, let me put you into my perspective and give you an overview of the background. I decided to focus on the Western Balkans and especially on Albania and North Macedonia, because quite recently, in March 2020, the EU decided that the accession negotiations will open for the two countries. In the meantime, the EU introduced a new EU enlargement methodology, splitting basically the process into chapters and clusters. My first observation was that the EU does not have an overall connectivity strategy. If we add in this equation the geopolitical proximity of the Western Balkans with the EU and the geopolitical angle, a broader issue of connectivity policy raises. Therefore, I'm suggesting a code of connectivity. I will tell you another time how I ended up with that title. And based on the EU's definition of connectivity and the structure of the new EU enlargement methodology, it can be stated that people-to-people, institutional, infrastructural, and regional connectivity are different but interconnected dimensions of connectivity. While education, research, digitalization, or transport, for example, represent the elements of connectivity. Connectivity is a valuable tool for policymakers to frame policies and comprises an overview of the challenges and strengths of the network. Thus, instead of focusing only on separate policies for each challenge without taking into consideration their interconnections between policies and their potential impacts on other dimensions, it would be more fruitful for all parties involved to develop a strategy that builds on overall enhancement of connectivity. Due to the limited time we have, I will only go through a few core suggestions of the code, but we can always discuss it later in the coming thematic coffee lounge. So the first dimension is the infrastructural. The EU connectivity agenda on Western Balkans is quite detailed only on infrastructural projects. Therefore, a concrete and even more precise evaluation of the current energy projects is required. This recommendation refers to the need to identify those areas where an immediate action involving the initiation of new projects will minimize the disadvantages of outdated infrastructure. In addition, the digital element of connectivity enhances the effectiveness of the other dimensions by enabling cooperation, development, and immediate action on reforms. Therefore, it would also be beneficial for all the parties to share their digital knowledge at a European level in order to increase the digitalization of the public sector. The following dimension is the people-to-people. An enhanced people-to-people connectivity has the potential to benefit the societies of the member states and the candidate countries by intensifying their interconnection. In that sense, webinars, video conferences, for example, like this one, especially in these times, are increasingly being seen as an innovative form of education and research. This has the potential to make the European higher education more inclusive, accessible, attractive, and competitive. Moreover, the harmful effect of the brain drain to the economies could partially reduce, given that people would be able to work and study remotely without the need to leave their home countries. Then we have the institutional dimension. I found this dimension to be the trickiest and most complex one, because it is the one which refers to the fundamentals chapter of the new EU enlargement methodology. The implementation of all necessary reforms suggested by the European Commission consider being a prerequisite for integration. However, the simplification and efficiency of the public sector will contribute to the enhancement of the institutional connectivity. This could be achieved, for example, by the extensive use of e-government in the two countries. Here, for example, there is an interconnection with the infrastructural dimension. I believe that the two countries are doing their best and we need to acknowledge their effort. However, governments and citizens should ensure that the reforms are actively undertaken. The final and fourth dimension is the regional. The Berlin process for the EU enlargement and the fact that for Albania and North Macedonia accession negotiations have now opened are tangible indications of closer cooperation among the Balkan states and the EU. However, regional connectivity is not a substitute for integration and should not be taken for granted. Building upon the accession process of 2019, enhanced regional cooperation would increase the exchange of ideas and effective practices for resolving common issues like regulatory matters, fight against corruption, and maybe parliamentary collaboration. And now the question is how all this can be achieved. Connectivity includes an array of possibilities and paths. Therefore, a common decision regarding the core priorities and the desirable outcome is essential, as they have the potential to create a solid foundation for the enhancement of connectivity. These priorities could follow the reasoning of the presented four dimensions of connectivity. A solid plan and timeline for the implementation of each connectivity dimension, revised according to the developments, will limit possible uncertainty in the future steps. Therefore, decisive leadership is vital for the decision-making process and the evaluation of the connectivity practices. Finally, a European Connectivity Summit will be beneficial for the EU, the candidate countries, and its partners. Within a coherent framework of discussions, the above-mentioned suggestion could be further narrowed down based on the specific needs of each country and keeping the common European benefit in focus. I was wondering which would be the right conclusion for this presentation, and after some thought, I realized that connectivity is not the result. It is a tool and a process. I know that nothing will ever be perfect, but at least we can try change the way we deal with the process of an issue by connecting the dots in a different way. Therefore, the reasoning of the Code of Connectivity represents and lights up the strings among the chapters and the clusters of the new EU enlargement methodology. Mr. Prefy, I'm done. I'm sending my warmest greetings and gratitude to all of you there in Aachen, and the floor is again yours. Thanks a lot.
So we have a problem with the English translation right now. A connectivity topic, I guess. So it would fit into our scheme. I'd like to introduce to you Ms. Christina Klemm. Well, she's the nice face of the Charlemagne Prize Foundation, and she managed our fellowship program. So from the beginning until now, it was her duty. And well, I'd like to say thank you very much. You did a brilliant job, huh? But was it fun or was it strange?
It was really fun, especially working with all these amazing fellows we had this year with amazing topics, with very interesting topics, and also to get to know how they really got engaged in their fields, in their research questions. And I think they did a brilliant job in providing us with wonderful results in the end.
Fine. So what will happen with the results? So we plan a book, yeah. But first, the contributions of each fellow have to be reviewed. So we have a quality assurance process established that is headed by the board. The German word is Kuratorium. So they take care for the results, and they take care for the fellows and for the finding out which is the one for the new program, which we will have in a session after lunch. So thank you very much to our board that they do this job and that they will lead us through the quality assurance. And then probably in early December, we will have a book where you can then, in solid hardware and without connectivity problems, you can read in detail what our fellows were talking about here. So I think that is a very nice conclusion that we can put under at the end of this research year. Yeah, that is the point that we can make until now. And well, I have to thank again the German Volksbanken and Raiffeisenbanken for their support. And without their support, this wouldn't have been possible. We hope that in a few minutes, English translation will be back. Thank God there is a little break scheduled. And I guess we will meet here again sharp at 10 minutes to 12. Yes.
Before that, we have set up virtual coffee lounges. So we would invite you to grab a coffee or a tea or whatever you would like to have and join our fellows in their thematic coffee lounges. You can find that on the navigation line on your event program. And just join one of the topics that has interested you during the presentation or where you would like to engage more. Our fellows will be in the coffee lounges so you can discuss with them. And then we'll see you back here on live stream at 11:50.
One of the nicest cities in Eastern Europe, whom he in December 2019 was elected for the second time as a president of Romania, a man who actually has seen a lot of anti-European squander and always remained relaxed. And he always said as a guiding principle, implementing reforms step by step, pro-European, transatlantic. The floor is yours. You have the floor, Mr. President. Thank you. Dear Mr. Linden, Mrs. Kuipen, dear Mrs. Redding, Professor van den Miedenaar, honored participants. I appreciate the efforts of the International Charlemagne Academy. This event, due to the difficult pandemic situation that we all face in Europe currently, and I actually commend you on the digital organization of this. Congratulations, Lady Mayoress Kuipen, for being elected, and lots of success to you. The crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic actually put us in an extraordinary situation and has actually also revealed several weak points and spots. This is a good example showing that we always have to count on disconcerting situations, even the European construction and the actually putting the workings of the European Union to the test. Is the Union in a position to respond adequately to these challenges? Do we act jointly better than individually as member states in order to close and coordinate the gap of development between us, and while at the same time maintaining the diversity and wealth of our societies? From Romania's viewpoint, I am decided to promote a pro-European approach and a positive answer to this question. In the 70 years since Robert Schuman's statement, the European Union has proven several times that it actually is a sustainable and solid project and will continue to be. Against the current backdrop of diverse challenges, however, it has become very obvious that the adjustment to the new conditions and circumstances of the European and global context needs a broad-based reflective process about the Union. This process must also use the insights learned from overcoming the current health crisis. Last year, on the occasion of the EU summit, where I had the honor on the 9th of May in Sibiu, Hermannstadt, to host this summit, all European states, heads of government and states of government, confirmed their determination to act jointly to the benefit of all European citizens to continue this project, a uniform, consistent Europe from south to north and east to west, united in the city with an impressive historical heritage that stands as a symbol for Europe, the diversity of symbol. We confirmed the spirit of Sibiu based on unity and commitment in favor of a strong, unified union that actually supports the rule of law, defends the rule of law, freedom and peace, and works for the benefit of our citizens. This vision of the future of Europe has to help us also in the debates held within the framework of the Conference on the Future of the EU. Ladies and gentlemen, for Romania, the accession to the European Union has shown its transformative power. It was a historical step that allowed us to cooperate in order to close the gaps between the member states and also within our societies. In economic terms and the social advance and progress of Romania, and also the development of democratic structures, and this all is a clear proof that the European project is a society project for us that will actually and has promoted our processes on all levels. We also make a major contribution to the European development. The support of the European project, the avoidance of divides and the involvement of society in decision-making processes is a crucial dimension of the Romanian profile on the Union level. The aim of the European unity is what we have devoted our first mandate of the European presidency in 2019. Through ourselves, we are the example showing that a stronger Europe and a more unified Europe benefits each and every one, more so than a Europe that actually focuses on concentric circles and different speeds of integration. And the answer of the Union to the current crisis confirms the legitimacy supported by Romania, focusing on unity and convergence on the European level. In view of the current requirements and challenges, we've learned that we have to overcome the divergences. The European Union, through the economic, social, and political contribution, and the contribution of each other member state, has made progress. The vision for the future of the structure that is Europe must be borne by the spirit of unity, solidarity, and cohesion on the basis of democratic values and principles, which form the basis and the foundation for the European Union. The European values must be pushed to the foreground again of our joint activities, and these values that unite us must overcome the differences. An answer to a crisis of this dimension, with such complex and far-reaching consequences, from health to questions of the freedom of movement, can only be faced by a coordinated European approach and answer. Romania has also contributed to the solidarity approach during this crisis and shown that it is a reliable partner. The services provided by Romanian physicians and nurses have been provided in Italy, and in Moldavia to support these countries. Our country, like Germany, is one of the member states that actually has started the strategic warehousing of critical products for the EU. Ladies and gentlemen, the European Union, the member states, the European citizens, all of us are confronted with changes that actually will have substantial impacts on future generations. The pandemic and its effects, the technological development, the management of climate change are just some of the issues we have to ponder on during this crisis. The success of the European House is based on the way and will be based on the way of how the various dimensions of integration, political, social integration, can actually dovetail and strengthen each other. Related to the most recent history of the European Union, it was, to my mind, two moments that proved major crises. That is the economic crisis that started in 2008 and the migration crisis in 2014-15. Both have brought about new solutions and approaches. And from this viewpoint, the current crisis also has to be understood as an opportunity to agree on instruments to respond to current problems and future challenges, an opportunity to fill gaps in a number of areas to actually be one step ahead of the next crisis. And this is why, as a health, we have to strengthen the health system in the EU. We have to invest in research and innovation, produce robust economic growth, plus a controllable budget debt. We have to create social security systems in order to protect the neglected groups, strengthen cybersecurity, and rate the effects of AI. We have to fight the consequences of climate change and understand and consolidate the role of the European Union as an actor. And overcoming the health crisis also has to mean that we overcome the long-term social and economic consequences. The political unity as part of the Council of Europe in June on the implementation of a European plan, the Recovery and Resilience Plan, is a striking historical milestone. The political agreement on the plan for economic recovery marks a turning point in the definition of joint measures on a European level, because for the first time they allow the use of a mechanism that allows actually borrowing money on capital markets, supporting the own funds of the European Union. In this way, the European Union has given the member states mechanisms and instruments in order to minimize the effects of the pandemic, both in economic and in social terms. At the same time, the emphasis on the digital component and the ecological dimension and the external development as part of the European Plan on Recovery will doubtlessly achieve and support the aim of sustainable recovery. The transformative potential of these two trends is an indisputable benefit. The consequences of the pandemic have actually affected member states in an asymmetrical fashion and will continue to do so. In order to minimize an increase in those gaps, the measures and decisions taken on the European level have to be constantly based on the principles of solidarity and be subordinate to unity and solidarity. At the same time, we have to adapt to technological progress. We have been forced to shift many things to the online realm, and this is why the labor market needs to adapt to these new requirements too. Some jobs can actually be done partly or exclusively online, others can't. And this brings us to the core of the matter. How can we fight the economic and social consequences and overcome or manage these in order to adapt to the new realities, avoiding further social inequality while protecting groups in need? In these areas, we have to jointly act on the European level. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to also make a few remarks on the external agenda of the EU. In the current global context of diverse challenges, from the downturn of multilateralism to the wave of political instability and the conflicts in our neighborhood or in its neighborhood, the EU must consolidate its role as a strong actor. We have all committed ourselves to strengthening the European Union, making it a credible, strong union, a Europe of democratic values, a Europe of solidarity, and a donor of humanitarian aid, a Europe that actually guarantees multilateralism. This is a crucial foreign policy objective for Romania. We support multilateralism and rule-based international order, or what we call the rule of law on the international level, and we support this actively. The multilateral approach based on shared values and principles of solidarity and European cooperation, international cooperation, is the way that will allow us to master the shared challenges. The model of the European Union, its democratic history, the highest standards in many areas, and the substantial financial and material contributions made to the actions of international organizations confirm that on the international level we can play a leading role by which we can actually decisively influence the revival of the multilateralism system. Internal measures must be accompanied and supported by a two-strand internal activity. But let's not forget the dependency on global players, and that we want to reduce it who do not share the same values. On the other hand, it is necessary to actually make the relations inside Europe more consolidated, and with those who have aims and objectives that are compatible with those of the EU. And this is why the transatlantic partnership is of fundamental importance for strengthening this, and Romania has always spoken out in favor of this. The United States have and still are a natural partner to the EU, to the European Union, that we share shared security objectives with. Strengthening this relationship, the relationship with other global actors, is of major importance. And here, foreign policy has to closely cooperate with research, with development policy, and be reconciled. And this while strengthening the multilateral system that is based on the rule of law without damaging the values of Europe. The way in which the Union has helped the neighboring countries in fighting the COVID pandemic will decisively impact how their citizens will see Europe. Romania showed solidarity, and this is why the neighboring countries in the Western Balkans and the Eastern Partnership, Ukraine and the Republic of Moldavia, is exemplary. The current crisis has also showed how important it is to strengthen resilience. On the state level, we have to invest in the resilience to withstand shocks and overcome these, be it in the economic area, in the health area, and we have to remember that improved resilience also helps to fight disinformation that has actually multiplied in an alarming way. Ladies and gentlemen, the time in which we are requires more than ever the unity of the member states, consensus, and overcoming inequalities on the European level. In this way, we can strengthen the European project and ensure that the European citizens live in security and prosperity and can continue benefiting from the achievements of the European Union. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much to the Charlemagne Prize laureate in Romania, President Klaus Johannis, and the bearer of great hope. And I would like now to hand over to my two other panelists and would like to introduce you to the former Vice President of the European Commission and former EU parliamentarian Viviane Reding. She is a European who's got a very sensual experience of Europe. After completing her studies, she traveled to Europe with her backpack. She started at the Sorbonne University, and she became famous as the commissioner for the judiciary, who fought with the telecommunications companies. She fought about roaming fees. She was never very pleasant as a commissioner. And she said, I fell into Europe like Obelix into the magician's drink. Then next is Luc van Middelaar, working at the University of Leiden. He produced the speeches for Herman van Rompuy, the first president of the Council of Europe, and he was the best ghostwriter the EU ever had. He also published 2 books, From Continent to the Union, Presence and Past of the Unified Europe. And soon we will have the European Pandemonium, and it will provide news on the pandemic situation. And this is probably also the question that we should address first. What does the Corona pandemic tell us about the situation or the status quo of the Union? Well, it reveals a lot about the condition of the national systems, because health policy. Address first. What does the corona pandemic tell us about the situation or the status?
Entschuldigung, ich habe die Übersetzung ausgemacht.
Sorry, I switched off the interpretation, says Viviane Redding.
Der Europäischen Union fällt.
Because this falls within the responsibility of the European Union. And then you actually perceive that the people on site don't want to understand. They simply say, we've got a problem here, and Europe has to solve it. And this shows the discrepancy between the technical, the institutional organization, and the feeling for Europe, where people want to have more Europe than the treaties actually give them. And the will for cooperating has produced a situation where the European Commission has actually taken action, although it was not responsible for it, to actually buy drugs for the population, as Mr. Johannes said, in a solidarity activity. Has actually taken action, although it was not responsible for it, to actually buy drugs for the population, as Mr. Johannes said, in a solidarity activity. Has actually taken action, although it was not responsible.
Ein Zeichen einer neuen Stärke für die EU. Man muss sich ja vorstellen, dass Donald Trump ursprünglich versucht hatte, die Forschungsarbeiten von Pfizer-BioNTech zu finanzieren, sich dadurch praktisch ein Monopol zu sichern.
They wanted to ensure a monopoly, and the EU Commission made sure to bring Pfizer and BioNTech on their side to finance the drugs from Horizon 2020, from budgets in Brussels, and thereby actually securing a big tranche of this drug for the EU. This is a big, big sign of strength of the European Union.
Europa ist ja immer
Europe is always has always become strong and powerful in times of crisis. President Johannes said this very clearly. When something goes wrong, you find that you can only solve it together, jointly, whether it's the economic crisis, the migration crisis, or now the pandemic. The progress in Europe has always and most of the time been born out of crises. And this is why crises for the European development have always been an opportunity, as you can see from history, because everybody realized we can't solve this as a small single unit. We have to get to act together so that we can actually put a joint solution on the table. And I do hope that this approach will not actually crumble again after the pandemic, but that we will continue this approach, and that we will have all understood that joint problems cannot be solved by closing borders. This was attempted at the beginning of the pandemic, but that problems cross borders and therefore also require a borderless response. Mrs. Reding, of course, you have to be critical. We've learned, of course, it was difficult initially. We left Italy alone, then China came with physicians and drugs, and lately I have the impression that we have showed a lot more solidarity. Intensive care units are provided for countries that don't have sufficient. We share masks and equipment and PPE. Do you think that the solidarity will continue if the BioNTech Pfizer drug, the vaccine, is approved, or will after the approval the old struggle start again between member states? Well, what is important is that we have a common purchasing system and have also found a distribution key for the individual member states. What will be happening through the political pressure on site, well, that's really hard to judge, especially because health policy is a national policy and also a national responsibility. But the fact alone that we have done our purchasing together and that we will actually distribute together. You talked about solidarity. You quoted this. People who live in a border region, for instance, let's talk about Luxembourg. Luxembourg has immediately, when France faced a huge problem in hospitals, accepted French citizens at the Luxembourg hospitals. And the same was then done by Germany and Switzerland. But this is Europe coming alive. And this is why Luxembourgers could not understand at all that Germany closed its borders. And I think that this was a real crisis for the European single market with its 4 freedoms. And it was also a good crisis because the single market had become taken for granted. And we've only learned how important it is. We found out when the borders were closed again. And there was an uproar among people. And this was a wake-up call, and the member states have now decided that they would never close borders again, no doubt about it. So you first have to face a crisis before we all understand the treasure, the asset we have with Europe, and that we should continue it further, developing it further. Thank you very much, Vivian Reding. I would like to ask Luc van Middelaar. My line is unfortunately a little bit compromised. I hope you can still hear me, says the moderator, the host. When you hear the solidarity appeals and watch the COVID situation, and the Hungary, Viktor Orban, and he doesn't care about the crisis the continent is in. I will make your budget fail, and it does, and probably there won't be this resilience fund of 750 billion if you insist on the rule of law. Looking at a state like Hungary using the pandemic to release emergency legislation that have actually added to the power of Orban. Do you think that there's more solidarity, or will there be more discrepancies?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Zina, for this difficult question. Well, allow me to answer in English. It's still the same difficulty, but it will be easier for me. Natürlich denke ich, dass... ich habe gesagt Englisch.
Oh, sorry, I said I wanted to answer in English. No,
Prime Minister Orban is playing a game here in trying to hold the whole Corona rescue package hostage to the green light of Hungary and the Hungarian parliament. For me, it is difficult to judge at this stage whether that is a bluff or not. But I think, and this comes back to some words of the Staatspräsident and of Commissioner Reding, that what we have seen this spring in particular, this appeal for solidarity, which went beyond formal competences, that is also a force which the Hungarian Prime Minister will have to reckon with. And I think many member states, and I'm also thinking about the country I know best, as they say in Brussels, the Netherlands, but also Austria and others, the so-called frugal states, they underestimated the rhetorical power of the appeal for solidarity. I should perhaps say it's not necessarily an appeal to have a very strong Brussels, but it's an appeal to help each other. Well, that appeal was underestimated by the frugal states. They had to backtrack and they had to accept in July these indeed historic, I agree, Wendepunkt Corona risk recovery fund. And I think Viktor Orban also risks a kind of backlash, which may be stronger than he would suspect. So we'll see how this ends. I think it also shows that in this crisis, people also in Northern and Western Europe are perhaps finally seeing and experiencing that the European Union is not only a market and a currency, but also a bloc in the world und eine Wertegemeinschaft. And I think that makes the pressure higher than previously in this debate. And it makes the tension higher between the call for rule of law conditionality in this link to the pandemic. Because it's more important now that we see that we share this space, this economic space, this space of civilization, that all members adhere to it. But maybe to conclude, I think we are faced here with a dilemma. There is no easy solution. I know you would ask me, so what do you propose to do? What are the steps? Well, of course, it makes sense, and it is good politics to increase the pressure, the financial pressure, and to stick to this line. But at the same time, I think there is a dilemma between the two vocations, zwei Rufe sozusagen, of Europe. Its vocation as a community of values on the one hand, which is very strong, but also on the other hand, and Herr Staatspräsident also spoke about it, Europe's vocation to be a geographical space and to encompass the whole continent. And at the end of the day, that dilemma between these two vocations is what is here at play. And it is, I would say, in particularly peinlich and schwer for Germany, which is more dearly than almost any other member state to the values, but which also has been split itself in the past between East and West.
If you describe this dilemma and you see now the election results from the USA, would you say that the power of the, let's say, Trump clones or Trump copies in the EU, like Orban and Kaczynski and so on, and Zeman in the Czech Republic, that their power is diminished in a way because now it's going to Joe Biden? Or would you think that this election results from the United States doesn't have any influence on the European situation at all?
Well, that's a very good question. And I think for me, it is one of the best parts of the Joe Biden victory that it will diminish the power of the mini-Trumps in Eastern and Central Europe, because it has not been said so often publicly. But the fact is that the Trump administration, since 2017, has encouraged and emboldened people like Viktor Orban, Kaczynski, Janša, who is in power in Slovenia since the spring, to resist, let's say, calls from Brussels, from Berlin, from Paris, to be more attentive to the rule of law, to uphold democracy, etc. So I do not think they will immediately change their policies, but it will definitely help that they will not have the political and moral support from the populist in chief in the White House. And I think that is very good news, and perhaps, as I said, the most important for Europe's cohesion and the democratic forces within the European Union of the Joe Biden victory.
Do you think that the election result from the United States will also influence, perhaps, the Brexit talks now happening in London, and will diminish a little bit the power of the radical side of Boris Johnson?
I think that's very clear. Prime Minister Boris Johnson is a man who is very sensitive to the political winds, as we know, and the wind is changing, and he is already changing his position. And the fact that Joe Biden is of Irish descent and makes no secret of it, of course, really strengthens the hand of the European Union, knowing that the standoff around the future of the situation between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland is one of the most important stumbling blocks. So this is another very positive effect for Europe's unity of the Biden victory. But I think it is less important, less fundamental, I would say, than what you first referred to, the strength of the aspiring autocrats in Eastern Europe, if I may use a somewhat stronger term.
Viviane Reding, how would you describe the importance of the election results for the European Union? What are the challenges on the one side, and what are the opportunities on the other side you see?
Well, we have gone through a number of tough years because the populist in chief in the White House has not lost a single opportunity to damage to Europe, to actually classify the former alliances or allied forces as enemies, and everything Trump could do to weaken Europe. And he therefore supported Orban, Kaczynski, et al. This is why he did it. And they have played a game between Russia and China against, and they bit the hand that fed them, in a way. The whole problem of the rule of law, however, was not actually, this problem wasn't started by Trump, because in 2012, Orban already tried to undermine the independence of the judiciary and to actually get rid of press freedom, to actually fence in universities. And in those years, I was back then the Judiciary Commissioner. We had several court actions introduced against Orban, but all of this developed further. And I think we need to put a stop to it. There is no excuse for this. Europe is built on values, has been from the beginning. And those who don't honor these values and don't instead trampling on them with their feet systematically shouldn't find a place in Europe. Let me tell you, dear autocrats, Europe is based on solidarity, a model where you get something at times, but very often you have to give something. And on this note, Mr. Orban should also understand that Europe is not a cash dispenser, an ATM, where you simply press a button and get money. No, you also have to do something in exchange for these taxpayers' money. And this means behaving like a state has to behave. President Klaus Johannes, as the Charlemagne Prize laureate, actually fighting so strongly for the European values in his own countries and against so many obstacles. When you actually look at your own situation, President Klaus Johannes, as the Charlemagne Prize laureate, actually fighting.
Ich hoffe, dass mich President Johannes
I hope that President Johannes can hear me. Yes, but he should actually switch off his. Yes, okay. Could you please repeat? President, looking at the US election results, would you say that this actually strengthens your position in Romania? I hope that President Johannes can hear me. Yes, but he should actually switch off his stream, his live stream. Okay. Could you please repeat? President, looking at the US election results, would you say that this actually strengthens your position in Romania?
Ich höre noch die Übersetzung. Herr Präsident, können Sie mich jetzt hören?
Ich höre Sie immer wieder mit Unterbrechungen, aber versuchen wir es noch einmal.
Okay, kein Problem. Ich wollte Sie fragen, was bedeutet für Sie das amerikanische Wahlergebnis für Ihren Kampf in Rumänien für die EU, für europäische Werte? Hat das eine Auswirkung?
Mein Einsatz für die europäischen Werte war konstant.
My fight for the European value has been constant and has not been oriented towards partners from the European Union. I think we have to be perfectly clear about the fact that there are external influences, but that when we want to become strong, and if stay strong where we do things right, we have to find this strength inside ourselves, within the EU, and actually continue doing so based on our values. I think it will take innumerable analyses of these elections in the United States. For me, it is very simple. The United States are an extremely important strategic partner in the bilateral relationship with Romania. And this partnership has been very strong over all of these years, and it will continue to be strong. I think what is important now is that we actually take the transatlantic relations between the US and the Union, that we strengthen this relation again. I said this repeatedly at various occasions. This transatlantic relationship is so much more than just a trade relationship. It's more than a historical relationship. It is simply the backbone of our value-based democracy. And I think this is the way we have to understand it. There's nothing possible without the transatlantic relationship, and the better it works from one or the other side of the Atlantic, the better it is respected and strengthened, the better it will work out. President, may I ask you again, considering the congratulations from Slovenia, for instance, better it works from one or the other side of the Atlantic, the better.
Begeisterung von Viktor Orban in seinem Glückwunsch. Sehen Sie die Gefahr eines großen Risses kommen innerhalb der Europäischen Union zwischen Westeuropa auf der einen Seite, Mittel- und Osteuropa, auch was die Haltung zu Trump und Biden angeht, aber auch was viele innereuropäische Werte betrifft? Orban in seinem Glückwunsch.
So sehr wir uns eine starke
the much we want to see a strong and unified union, we have to realize that not all of the attitude of the European politicians, not all of the attitudes are the same. I do not think that this topic of the US elections will actually cause divergences or disputes in the EU. We've seen that some Europeans were a little rash to voice their comments on the results. Well, honestly speaking, I do not think that this fact is too much of a problem for us in the EU. I think the problem that we have to face up to is that there are major differences in the standards of living. I think we have to tackle that the acceptance of the rule of law is getting stronger and strengthened in the European Union. We have to see that our strength is that we act jointly.
Wenn Sie, Herr Präsident, sehen, dass in einem Land wie Ungarn, in einem Land wie Polen man sagt,
Rule of law.
Ohne uns. Wir akzeptieren, dass ihr in Westeuropa Flüchtlinge aufnehmt. Wir nehmen sie nicht auf. Wenn Sie sehen, dass in Ländern wie Polen und Ungarn Rechtsstaatlichkeit eingeschränkt wird, Medien monopolisiert werden vom Staat, Meinungsfreiheit eingeschränkt wird, wie sollte aus Ihrer Sicht die EU damit umgehen? Sollte sie sagen, es gibt verschiedene Interpretationsformen von Demokratie, es gibt verschiedene kulturelle, geschichtliche Hintergründe. Wir müssen das akzeptieren, dass das in Ungarn und Polen und im Ansatz vielleicht in Tschechien oder in Bulgarien anders läuft? Oder denken Sie, dass die EU da wirklich ganz klare Kante zeigen muss? Kulturelle, geschichtliche Hintergründe. Wir müssen das akzeptieren, dass das in Ungarn und Polen und im Ansatz...
I have always said so and feel that we have to work towards a stronger integration of the European Union. I'm actually a fan of a stronger integration. The states you've just given us as an example are not so convinced about this integration. And this is also the crucial role that the reflection process plays and that we've agreed upon, and that will actually get started over the next months. We cannot simply ignore attitudes of states, but we can discuss the problems, we can draw up joint solutions. We will probably not succeed in a few months or in a few years to strengthen this unity, but I think the right approach is to flag up the problems, to discuss the problems, address the issue, and what's even more important, to talk about the solutions to these problems and to implement these solutions. All of this takes a lot of patience, a lot of convincing, and lots of belief, a strong belief in the European Union.
Gibt es Stunden, wo Sie denken, der Glaube schwindet mir, das fällt auseinander, weil ich hier in Brüssel manchmal erlebe, dass gerade Vertreter Ungarns zu uns kommen und sagen, wir akzeptieren das ja, dass ihr so seid, wie ihr seid. Wir akzeptieren ja, dass ihr Flüchtlinge aufnehmen wollt. Wir akzeptieren ja, dass ihr den Rechtsstaat so interpretiert, wie ihr das tut. Aber wir interpretieren es anders. Wir wollen keine Flüchtlinge. Und so wie wir euch tolerieren, toleriert gefälligst um. Und da frage ich mich manchmal, gibt es da wirklich noch eine Brücke, die wir bauen, dass ihr so seid, wie ihr seid? Wir akzeptieren ja, dass ihr Flüchtlinge aufnehmen wollt.
Auch Brückenbauer gibt.
I am sure there are bridge builders there too. I have to admit, there have always been complex topics to address. Time and again at the Council, we have spent hours and days sitting together to come up with solutions. And if we now actually focus on the most recent history of the EU, we can say that we've always come up with solutions. And this is clearly a pointer to the fact that we should not doubt or be in despair. At times, it is easy to find a solution, but mostly it is a complex task to come up with solutions. And at times, it is very time-consuming and very complex to find solutions. But our recent history, see the Council meeting this summer on the big rescue package or recovery package, shows that it is possible and that it works out and that we all we can all find a common solution. I don't think that there's good reason to doubt in the European concept. Thank you very much, President. I would like to pass on the question to Mr. Miller. When we talk about the mini-Trumps in the EU, what strikes me is that we always look to Central and Eastern Europe, but is it that easy? Isn't it that there are also copies in the west of Europe? And that in Eastern Europe, there's also a powerful counter-movement to these mini-Trumps? Yes, exactly, Mr. Zina. I think we have to be careful when we talk about historical conditions, because it's always a question of democratic majorities, both in the East and in the West. We already had in France, in the Netherlands, in Belgium, in Italy, had national populists ruling when Mr. Orban was still in the ranks. And we should not forget this, Mr. Zina. And you're absolutely right when you say that there are also democratic movements in Central and Eastern Europe. And we've seen this in Poland for weeks now, but also in other countries. And this is why President Johannes is absolutely right when he says that it is also a question of patience. Not only patience as in terms of wait and see, but strategic patience and show a clear perspective and actually pushing powers and promoting powers that work in that direction. And that is a question, an issue for each and every one. But I agree when he says that it'll take longer than we would like to see. If I may include President Johannes once more in the discussion, if you would imagine just for a second, you were the boss of the future conference on the future of the European Union, and there's one core wish you could make for the future of the Union. What would be your wish? What would the reform project that you would like to see happen? This is what we mention time and again when we actually cover from Brussels. Hungary is so powerful because of the veto rights. Cyprus is so powerful because it can stop actually sanctions against Belarus with a simple veto. Do you think that this phenomenon of the unanimous vote, is this the problem? Would you say, well, it would be easier to introduce the majority principle in all other areas? What's your wish for the future? Well, I don't want to give you too long an answer. Just briefly, allow me to answer your concrete question. Yes, I think that the architecture of the Union is still problematic, parts of it. This reflection process must be used in order to find out how we can actually take the union to the next future level. There are two possible directions that are not compatible with each other. We can continue deepening the union, strengthening the union, and this means we can become more unified. This is the direction that I pursue. This is the direction that I view to be the right direction. On the other hand, there are politicians in Europe saying, no, Brussels has too much to say anyway. Certain responsibilities, areas, and decisions must be turned back to the nation states. So this would be the economic union, and this is a direction that I personally do not favor. But in terms of the decision of whether we chart this or that course, well, this will decide upon the improvement of the architecture of the European Union. I think if there is a decision available on this, then we can simply ask we can answer the other questions more easily too. The question of the majority-based consensus or qualified majority or simple majority, I think this question is more of a technical matter, and I don't think this is a surprise for us. But as soon as we know where we want to go and how we want to define ourselves as a union, then I think we can actually answer this question of the right majority principle. A second thing keeps me more on my toes, to be honest, and that is the issue of relations between the EU and its citizens. Unfortunately, we find time and again that the political part of the union and the citizens of the union citizens, are not actually getting closer, moving closer. No, distances are growing. This is reflected by the election turnout, which is very low, especially for the European Parliament. This is reflected when you look at the coverage, which is usually very critical about the European Union. And this is reflected in surveys where many Europeans think that they are either not informed well enough or that they are not informed and that Brussels is too far away from them. And this is not to be understood in geographical terms, but instead as a type of approach. I think this is the true problem. And I think there is lots and lots of work ahead of us, many decisions to be taken. And this is a problem that we will hopefully tackle within this process. What should a political problem do and deliver if it is not backed up by its citizens? How should the European Union come up with solutions if it does not actually involve or customize the message for its citizens? This is a very serious problem. And I am absolutely prepared to commit myself to solving this. And I know that there are many other colleagues who share this, my view, and can hardly wait for starting the encounters as part of this reflection process in order to also approach our citizens and to reach out to the citizens to close this gap. Thank you very much, President. Vivian Redding, you will also play an important role to act as a transmission belt to close this gap between the Union and European citizens. Thank you very much to the panelists, Vivian Redding and Luc van Middelaar, whose latest book was actually received with a lot of approval. Anthony Gardner, the person who will shape the European policy for Joe Biden, liked this book. Now I would like to thank for being the host for this roundtable and would like to hand the floor back to Dr. Linden in Aachen. Well, thank you very much. From the Digital Church here in Aachen, I would like to wholeheartedly thank the four panelists. To me, the buzzword of this discussion was consensus in Europe. Consensus between the member states, but also consensus between the policymakers responsible. If we now follow the discussion about the rule of law in Europe and feel that Europe is the society based on values, playing a big role in the world, then we have to address this little issue as soon as possible. From Aachen, we will also make our contribution. Again, thank you very much, President Johannes. Thank you, Mrs. Redding. Thank you very much, Luc de van Middelaar and Ralf Ziener, the host. And I would like to tell the participants at their monitors, we will have a short break until 1:30, and then we will actually introduce you to the new fellows for 2021. So see you in a few minutes, and thank you.
Hallo, liebe Community. Ich darf Sie nochmal recht herzlich.
Hello, dear community. I would like to welcome you once again cordially after the last break. Today, we will now come to the highlight of the day, and that's the presentation of the fellows for the coming research year. Let me briefly remind you of the Slido poll on the crucial topics moving Europe. We generated first cluster this morning, but it would be nice if you actually updated your input. Maybe something has changed and moved in the meantime, and we can discuss this following the presentation. What is it like in the Rhineland area? When you do something the second time, it's almost a tradition, they say, and the presentation of the second generation of fellows will hopefully be exactly this, a tradition. And this is what we're going to do now. So let's see what the board of directors has chosen in terms of topics. Because this was not the case the first time, it was the Charlemagne Prize Foundation. But now we have established a board of directors with renowned members supporting us to introduce a higher quality and neutrality. So let's start. Our first fellow is Mrs. Fodini Fricki from Cyprus. She lectures at the King's College in London, and we're really excited to see the topic she has chosen. You have the floor.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. It's a great honor to accept this fellowship today. Many thanks to the Charlemagne Academy, who have managed to put together such an impressive summit. And many special thanks to Christine Clem for her help in this process as well. My project focuses on common European data spaces, which are currently under development in the EU, with the aims to create a single market for data that will ensure Europe's global competitiveness and data sovereignty. And during my fellowship, I intend to look at the links between these data spaces and policy development to offer an understanding of how solidarity can advance clear and trustworthy data governance mechanism, but also how we can use solidarity to support data literacy for a citizen-centered European data economy. So I hope to show that by combining solidarity policy with data literacy, we can advance a European data economy that will benefit us all in the European Union. And I look forward to start unpacking this project. And thanks again to the Charlemagne Academy for their support. Thank you.
Vielen Dank. Der zweite Fellow ist
Thank you
Dr.
very much. The second fellow is Dr. Julian Ramadishin. He is a policy scientist from the University of Bonn, and he comes from Ukraine. We look forward to your presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Julian Ramadishin. I'm a researcher at the Center for Advanced Security, Strategic and Integration Studies at the University of Bonn in Germany. And my project is about EU security and defense cooperation. It addresses the fundamental dilemma where, on the one hand, the European Union wishes to become a strong global actor and to reduce its dependence on the United States, and on the other hand, it continues to outsource its security to Washington, even when it comes to addressing security threats in Europe's immediate neighborhood. And with the generous support of the Charlemagne Prize Academy, I will investigate how the European vision of strategic autonomy in security and defense can be reconciled with the strong and meaningful transatlantic partnership, and what role solidarity plays in this relationship. Thank you very much for your support.
Yes, thank you. Do I have to comment on this? To be live on the screen. The third fellow is Mrs. Sophie Pornschlegel. She's the Senior Policy Analyst at the Policy Center in Brussels, the European Policy Center in Brussels.
Vielen Dank. I will switch
thank
to
you very
English.
much. Ich werde jetzt Englisch sprechen.
First of all, thank you. I'm very happy to be
herzlichen
able to
Dank.
have this fellowship and to work on it for a year. So thanks to the Charlemagne Prize Academy and Christine Klemp again. My research question focuses on how the EU can develop a democratic acquis. So we all know that it has some democratic acquis communautaire, but it doesn't really have an acquis that concerns democracy as such, despite having European values and despite having treaties. So the question is whether if we have some certain institutional reforms within the European Union, we can foster transnational solidarity. And maybe to explain where this comes from, especially during this COVID-19 crisis, we saw that lots of EU member states ended up having a national reflex, closing their borders despite being pro-European. We saw a chaotic patchwork of travel restrictions and even export bans, which shows that transnational solidarity is not a given. We have a historic recovery fund now with a next generation EU package and also hopefully the end of the negotiations of the multi-annual financial framework. But what we could see is that it took a very long time, that you had huge differences, and that it ended up in ugly media battles between the Nordics and the southern countries. So solidarity is not automatic. And the question is whether if we change the frameworks and the structure of the European institutions, maybe we can achieve a better solidarity. And I will look at three key areas for this. The first one will be looking at EU citizenship and political participation. So civic education also, but deliberative formats, how to better include EU citizens in EU decision-making. The second one is looking at how to better safeguard European values. As we know, rule of law is one of the big topics, but also how civil society can support European values. And the third one will be looking at the typical institutional reforms. In the next year, there will be some reforms, or at least that are planned by the European Commission work program on the EU electoral law, and maybe also on European political parties. Of course, most of it will require treaty changes, which is unlikely to happen, but I still think that there is a possibility to have incremental changes. And it also feeds into also the Conference on the Future of Europe, where we hope that it will be pushed by the German Council presidency that is coming up. But hopefully in the next year, there will be some dynamic in this area. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank. Der nächste im Bunde ist Radu.
Thank you very much. And next is Radu Dumitrescu. Mr. Dumitrescu comes from the home country of our Charlemagne Prize laureate, and he
Good day
is
to every one of you. My name is Radu
University.
Dumitrescu, and I have the honor of being a fellow this year. My project is about Europe's supply lines and how they need to be shortened so they do not reach from Berlin to Beijing, but from Berlin to Bucharest. Until the pandemic, companies from the more developed world, Europe included, had been moving their production capabilities to countries like China. The pandemic has showed us that this is not a resilient model. By having its production capabilities so far removed, Europe is vulnerable. Companies are seeking to relocate, and while the EU cannot bring them back home to France or Germany, they can bring them back closer to home, to Eastern Europe. Production that is internal to the Union will mean more jobs for EU citizens, which in turn will ease differences of development and income between member states. Moreover, increased job security will lessen political tensions and turn away voters from populism. We celebrate European companies, and rightfully so, but I intend to look at how we can help them get back closer to home. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Vielen Dank.
Ja, ein wunderbares Thema.
A wonderful topic.
Frau Hanna Pohl.
Mrs. Hanna Pohl, you are German, and you are researching at the Max Planck Institute for Society Research.
Thank you very much. My name is Hanna Pohl, and I'm a researcher at the Max Planck Institute for the Study of Societies. My research project is called Solidarity Through Movement, Solidarity Beyond Movement. I want to research the relationship between border crossings, physical encounters, and perceptions of solidarity within the EU, especially in the light of the border closings due to COVID-19. In a participatory and qualitative research project, I will conduct interviews and focus group discussions with 3 highly mobile groups within the EU. First, Erasmus students. Second, seasonal agricultural workers. And third, employees and tourism. I'm thrilled to begin the research and start the conversation with them on mobility and EU solidarity. So thank you so much for giving me this chance. Thank you.
Für dieses Fellowship.
Ja, wunderbar. Ich darf sagen, ich glaube, das ist ein herrlicher Querschnitt durch Europa.
This is a wonderful cross-section of Europe. These are subjects that are addressed that move Europe. You can change something. They can make a contribution. I think with the Charlemagne Prize, we have 1 or 2 channels to create exposure and public awareness. We look very much forward to your results, but also to discussion with you, and hopefully also to a personal encounter and discussion in a hopefully post-COVID time. What's left for me to say? Well, ready, steady, go. The starting pistol has been fired. We've done our homework. We will support you to our best of ability and wherever you ask us for support. And we're very excited to see your results. And we'll then meet again at the next summit next year, the latest, where you will report your research results like the fellows before you. We're delighted and really anticipating this, and this basically brings me to the end of today's summit. For the Charlemagne Prize, this was a premiere, the first virtual event. Exciting things going on. We're basically testing right now the European internet, and some surprises were there. The coax cable that was actually excavated in front of the interpreter's door. All of a sudden, somebody actually passed by the door with a lawnmower. These are things that you really have to expect and be prepared for in real life. This is real life, and this is exactly what we wanted to show here. Real life, not the political bubbles that at the end don't really hit the truth. With this, we're done. We're through with today's event. We look forward to your fellowship year. What you see here is the cloud. The changes in terminology, it is reflected very clearly. Climate change is still in the right place, in the center. But apart from that, there have been some shifts that become visible. And I don't want to comment on these shifts, but you can do that in the chat rooms that we have installed here. And that will stay open open and available for you until 6 p.m. There will be a YouTube video where you can actually look at everything being discussed today. And I actually sent my regards from Aachen, and I'm very happy that we really finished and completed a very nice event. Although it was a premiere, and next time around it'll always be better. So send my regards from Aachen. Take care. Bye-bye.